Chapter 111 Castellan's Tavern. The land you see rising and falling before you is the Sighing Hills. The hills located at the border to the east of Sighing Mountains. Look, the snow-covered summits in the distance going straight into the clouds are the Sighing Mountains. As he rode on his horse, Poutre pointed towards the mountains in the distance, which towered into the clouds as far as they could see. He was providing information regarding the geography of the Northland to Thales. Thales raised his head and expanded his field of vision. He then let out a puff of warm air in the biting, cold environment. The Sighing Mountains were once the tallest mountains during the age of the ancient empire. The range was connected to Glacier Queequor to the north and traveled south through the Northland Province as well as Eastern Southland Province, which separated the empire's northern region. It is currently Constellation's eastern sea hill, and also Duke Cullen's fiefdom. The dangers in the Sighing Mountains and the difficulties faced when climbing them caused travelers to stop in their footsteps whenever they see it. They were only able to bow their heads and sigh. That is how this place obtained its name. Poutre put down the tobacco pipe in his hand and lowered his head as well to sigh, as if he was responding to his own words. When the ancient empire was still around, this was an infamous spot where criminals were banished to. This was a chaotic place. When the empire was destroyed, more unrest occurred. It lasted until a branch of the elves moved to this place and stayed here for nearly 300 years. They moved around freely in the mountain, and when they reached the height of their power, they built their own kingdom. After the Battle of Eradication, the northwest section of the Sighing Mountains was owned by the Western Peninsula, and the southeast section of the mountains belonged to Eastern Peninsula's Handball. Elves in the Sighing Mountains. Wait, Battle of Eradication Chronicles, the world's destruction, seemed to have mentioned this before. Speaking of elves, Thales could not help but cast a glance at Ida, who was behind him. What is it? Ida noticed Thales' gaze and spread her hands in a frustrated manner. I don't know which generation of my relatives lived there either. My history's bad. Thales shook his head and turned his head around to continue listening to Poutre's explanations. He could not rely on that elf, who could not even remember his name. Even if she was in supreme class. The dangerously steep northwest section of the Sighing Mountains runs through the eastern part of Exted and Constellation. Archduke Trendida's Reformation Tower and the lonely old Tower of Constellation's Fries family are respectively located on two different mountains with a valley between them. Both are incredibly wary of each other. Nonetheless, both are spots that are easy to fend against, but difficult to attack. Further north of the mountain range is Exted's Elifer City, which is the fiefdom of the Archduke there, and further south of the mountain range is Constellation's Land of Cliffs region, which is also the fiefdom of the Guardian Duke stationed there. However, it is precisely because of the steep cliffs in the Sighing Mountains and the weather in the north, that Exted's Elifer City as well as Constellation's Land of Cliffs region ended up near the Sea of Eradication. The number of ports are very few too, and the few that they have are situated in odd locations by the edge of the cliff. Poutre smoked his tobacco and looked at the mountain range in the distance with a fascinated expression on his face. During the First and Second Peninsular War, the Allied forces from the Eastern Peninsula traversed the Sea of Eradication and landed on either Constellation's Eastern Sea Hill or South Coast Hill. This was because Constellation's Land of Cliffs region and Exted's East Bank port owned the natural sea cliff. It was easy to defend but difficult to attack due to its steep walls. In addition, it was bestowed upon them by the Sighing Mountains. During the Third Peninsular War, the Eastern Peninsula Army pretended to attack Constellation's eastern seaport, but launched a surprise attack on Exted's coastlines. With a small number of soldiers, they attacked the sea cliff and obtained astonishing results. In the end, they broke through Elifer City and entered Exted's heart. Peninsular War. Another question popped up in Thales' heart. The war started due to the conflict between the two peninsulas, for example, on the diminishing whales in the Sea of Eradication. After the Battle of Eradication, we found that the eternal oil within them was the best fuel, and it was even better than charcoal. Poutre provided an answer to his question. The rights to hunt them, the quotient, the hunting regions and seasons where we were not allowed to hunt the whales, these were constantly the main focus of the argument between these countries located on the two coasts. This was the main topic of discussion during the four peninsular wars. Of course, after the Third Peninsular War, the political situation in the two coasts changed too much. Our relationship with Exted turned completely sour, and Maynard Knox was engaged in a fight with Handball for absolute dominance in the Eastern Peninsula. In the end, under the virtuous king, Midir III's policy, we formed an alliance with Maynard Knox, while Exted grew closer to Handball. This caused the Fourth Peninsular War, which happened in year 468 of the calendar of eradication, turning things into a true world war. The flames of war were no longer restricted to one faction of power traversing the sea to invade another faction of power, instead it reached every corner of the world. Thales remembered the middle-aged king who held a staff and had a smile on his face. He was one of the three kings of Constellation in Mindy's Hall. The portrait of his head was engraved on the country's silver coins and burnt onto Thales' chest. Then, he remembered the Corleone sisters and the so-called Starlit Night Alliance. Thales shook his head and chased all of these thoughts out of his head. You do not agree to Mindy's policy for diplomacy? The prince asked curiously. That is not the case. Poutre shook his head. Forming an alliance with Maynard Knox was something that happened naturally due to the progression of events. The Far Easterners have an ancient proverb that goes like this: form a good relationship with your allies in the distance, and attack your close enemies. The Fourth Peninsular War was on an incredibly large scale and the results were devastating. Poutre was immersed in his thoughts as he slowly spoke, but to me, the new political situation also strengthened the ties and relationships between the two peninsulas. The reasons behind the start of a world war were destroyed by the increasingly complicated linkages between the countries, such as the conflict between ourselves and the Western Peninsula. Since the Fourth Peninsular War, we have not gone to war with the peninsulas for 2 centuries. We have enjoyed more than 200 years of peace. Before this, the two peninsulas would wage war against each other due to the conflicts between us accumulating so much that they reached a boiling point almost every single century. Thales frowned. He still believed that with the country's productivity levels and its political system, this so-called peninsular war was a little strange. Traversing the sea to launch an expedition on another peninsular, how much manpower and supplies were needed? Were the repercussions and sufferings caused as a result of these wars really something that a little eternal oil could compensate for? They continued to move forward as the soldiers by their sides continued to glance at them. Soon, a village materialized before their eyes. Thales lifted his head. He noticed that there were ropes tied around the trees beyond the village. There were quite a large number of food items bound there, such as jerky, bread and other items. There were even prey like deer, foxes and rabbits. Is this Northland's custom? My soldiers have already confirmed the safety of this village. At that moment, the vassal under Archduke Lampod, Viscount Kentavita, went up to them from the back of the group. He moved past the crowd and proceeded into the village before he dismounted and handed the reins to a soldier. We will dismiss a portion of the enlisted soldiers from the villages around the area. You can search for an inn here to rest for a while and enjoy some lunch. With Ralph's help, Thales got off his steed and let out a long sigh for being able to temporarily get off his horse. Then, he lifted his head in excitement to observe the village, which was located beside Raymond Pass. The place was supposed to be a small, peaceful village that did not even have a wall. But at that moment, it was surrounded by strong, burly men dressed entirely in armor. Even though most of the army escorts were stationed outside the village to rest, Thales could tell with just one glance that there were Northland soldiers who were moving about. They were engaged in activity under the single-story houses built from bricks, earth and stone. Yet curiously, these soldiers did not seem to disturb the peace and quiet within the village. They integrated themselves with the men and women in the village, who were dressed in sackcloth. The village square was already filled with soldiers as well as villagers sitting around and drinking from their mugs. Their laughter shook the skies. This time, I'm going to win against you in drinking, Creighton. There were 2 people sitting at a huge table, which seemed to be usually used for displaying goods for sale. The table was filled with mugs and a villager was pounding his fist against it. He was looking at the soldier sitting across him, refusing to back down. I can drink 10 pints within a minute. We'll know right away if you're just bluffing. The soldier threw down his axe, took off his chest plate and pounded the table with his fist in a similar manner, refusing to show weakness. The person who wins is the only one who can get a rose's flower crown. There was a group of onlookers surrounding them, enthusiastically causing a clamor. One of them was a young lady holding a flower basket. She was laughing loudly. What a load of bull. She put down the flower basket and boldly lifted her skirt to sit down, joining in the drinking contest at the table. The person who can outdrink me is the one who will get my flower crown. Thales could not help but chuckle softly. During that instant, he had even slightly forgotten that these extant soldiers had clashed with his guards on the battlefield, trying to kill each other. This was different compared to the well-behaved civilians Thales came into contact with in Constellation's Eternal Star City, a different society from the city, which had distinct social class boundaries. The rhythm in this extant village was wild and lively, the atmosphere was relaxed and full of enthusiasm. The villagers were basically tall and well-built Northlanders. They had bold appearances and their laughter was hearty. Hey, Tolja, how long are we staying here? A soldier with a full-grown beard shouted loudly in their direction. He seemed like a mid-rank officer and he was carrying a warhammer as well as a wooden mug in his other hand. Come on, please tell me we're staying overnight. We're leaving by noon, Tolja replied loudly with displeasure. Before that, tighten your pants around your waist, metalhead Crocker. Pity. The officer with the beard took a big swig in his disappointment. Wine flowed down his beard as he mumbled, I remember that Hero Tavern has a beautiful cook. Thales did not bother about the soldiers and villagers who were pointing at him as they whispered among themselves. He did not bother about their disdainful and malicious gazes either. He followed Kentvita and Tolja, moving forward. Behind him were the members of the diplomat group. Are you certain that the safest way is for the soldiers to enter the village and drink with the villagers? A Northland soldier was swinging his arm over the villagers' shoulders and laughing boisterously as the duo walked past them. The prince's young attendant, Wya Kaso, saw this and cautiously pressed down on the sword by his waist. With a tone that showed he did not truly approve of this, he said, if I was an assassin, I could blend in with the villagers. Don't be too nervous. This is not Constellation, it's Extit. Viscount Kentvita laughed loudly. Most of the people in the village are veterans who have been released from military service. They can be trusted. In truth, due to their honor and dignity, the prince, who is a guest here, will be even safer in their midst. Wya shrugged, curling his lips to express his doubts. Do not worry, Thales nodded at his attendant. The soldiers have already dispersed and blended into the village. Even assassins will have to think about the possibilities and consequences of an assassination. This is Mountain Pass Village, right? Poutre looked around him in fond nostalgia. I recall there is a tavern here whose owner is very famous. Hero Tavern. It was opened 20 years ago by a retired veteran, Tolja said faintly by the side. The rye wine in the tavern is well known far and wide. Thales, who was curiously taking in the sights around him, followed Kenvida and Tolja into a larger stone building. A large sign of a wine mug was hung on the door. The Fire Knight pushed open the 2 doors and walked into the noisy Hero Tavern. Thales followed him and stepped into the warm stone building. Once the chill in his body was chased away, he noticed that the guests filling the tavern suddenly fell silent. Plenty of people cast their gazes on Thales. He recognized that some of the guests were Northland soldiers, and it was clear that they had just arrived. However, several seconds later, the lively atmosphere returned to the tavern, as if the people who came in were just a couple of normal people. You did not clear the tavern, Wya frowned and said, then, His Highness. A bold and crude old voice rose into the air like an explosion. Boy, this is my tavern. A burly old man with silver hair and a face full of wrinkles placed his elbows on the wooden bar counter. With a condescending expression, he said, it doesn't matter if it's the king, a priest, a foreigner, or even a god. No one can chase away my customers here. Wya frowned. The old man then narrowed his eyes and lowered his head to look at Thales. A strange expression appeared on his face. You sure have a lot of people. I only serve customers who can pay to buy wine. Thales smiled at him. The prince could not help but notice that the old man in front of his eyes may be quite ripe in his age, probably at least 60 years old. However, his biceps and triceps were still well toned, his waist was thick and he stood up straight. His gaze was direct and fierce. Caslin, don't worry about the numbers or the problem about money. Kenvida laughed. He sat down without reservation in front of the bar counter before he dug out a money pouch. We have plenty of golden circular pieces that have Rakeru's head portrait on them. Let me tell you something else. The Archduke of Black Sand asked me to send you his regards and greet Madame Talia. The old man threw him a deep look. A thought appeared in Thales' head. He's just a retired veteran and a normal owner of a tavern, yet the Archduke of Black Sand has taken personal interest in him. But Kenvida did not obtain the response he should have gotten. Each mug of rye wine is 6 extant bronze coins and the price of each mug for nobles is 60. The owner of the tavern, the old Caslin, cast a glance at the money pouch with an aloof expression. He then pushed it back before he let out a cold harumph. Also, I don't accept gold coins. Especially gold coins from Lampod, who killed his own family. Kenvida's expression instantly froze. Thales was also shocked. Killed his own family. Kenvida spread his hands towards Tolja, who was behind him, and put on a resigned expression. That was a battle of inheritance. It is an ancient ceremony. Tolja walked forward and brought out a pouch full of extant bronze and silver coins. Without batting an eyelid, he continued to speak flatly. The Archduke defeated his older brother, that is all. His death was just an accident. He can argue however he wants. He killed his family and that's that. The old Caslin received the money pouch in disdain. As for that so-called ancient ceremonial battle, that's something in the past, and what the citizens of the Empire used to make us kill each other. The Archduke of Black Sand killed his older brother, won his right of inheritance, and adhered to a ceremonial battle that seemingly came from the ancient empire. Thales quietly stored that information in his heart. He then cast a glance at the boorish old man. Additionally, this tavern owner does not have an ordinary background. He does not seem to be on the same side as Lampod. Perhaps I can obtain some information from him. So there's 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. Caslin weighed the money pouch in his hand and counted the number of people in front of him. Wait, an idea suddenly struck Thales and he spoke in the nick of time. Let them pay with the Archduke of Black Sand's money, but we will pay with our own money. We have, about a dozen people. Caslin's eyes moved and noticed Thales, who was not even at the height of the bar counter. Kenvida frowned and looked at Thales, as if he had something in his mind. Thales nodded in Poutre's direction. The latter raised his brows, then walked forward and brought out a few silver coins as well as bronze coins. Ah, I recognize this head portrait, the Oath Keeper Midir, yes. Caslin took the silver coins and threw them away casually. Instead, he picked the bronze coin with Midir's head portrait engraved on it. He scrutinized the picture on it before he lifted his head and laughed, revealing a mouth full of yellowing teeth. The lot of you are from the Empire. Thales smiled and shook his head. No, we come from Constellation. By his side, Ya's expression changed, and Poutre looked like he was thinking of something. I get it, brat. You're the Prince of Constellation, the one who has come to apologize. Caslin stared at him straight. You have a long and arduous journey ahead of you. Thales shrugged. All right, Caslin snorted. Constellation silver coins are even more valuable than our silver coins. There's no reason for me to not receive your money. Hey, Kentvita protested, is Archduke Lampard's gold coin not money now? HMPH, Brian. Hero Tavern's owner ignored the Viscount. He shouted at the top of his lungs and tapped the wooden window behind him. 20 mugs of rye wine, the normal one will do. A tall man with black hair and in his 30s walked out from behind the counter. There was a scar from a burn on the left side of his face. He let out a cold harumph. In a bad mood, the tavern assistant lifted a thin wooden stick and turned towards the wooden cabinet behind him. Then, with a shake of his arm, he hooked the ears of a dozen-something wooden mugs with great proficiency and pulled them over, having them lined on the wooden stick like a kebab. He shook his arm again, and the dozen-something mugs fell on the bar counter. Brian nimbly extracted the wooden stick and lifted a huge, wooden wine barrel. As he poured the wine into the mugs, he looked at the group with a hostile expression. He even glared at Thales in the process. This isn't something that can be done with regular arm strength. WYA looked at the assistant's movements and his expression changed. He spoke in a low tone, I can bet that he's an expert with the sword. Don't mind him, Castellan laughed boisterously, my assistants here are all crude men who were once soldiers. Tolja said flatly, of course, Hero Tavern is the gathering and also parting place for retired Northland soldiers. Thales discovered dejectedly that he could not even haul himself up the chair by the bar counter. He was just not tall enough. If he had spoken up while the crowd was watching him, it would have been incredibly awkward. At this moment, a guard who knew sign language was incredibly important. Ralph picked Thales up and placed him on the bar counter's high stool. The attendant, WYA, who discovered that he did not manage to perform his duty once more, frowned again. Kentvita and Putre sat down by his side. As for the citizens of Constellation and Extit, they were split into two very distinct groups. They sat down on two round tables, and their soldiers glared at each other. Oh, heavens, Willow looked at the noisy Northland customers around him. Brimming with spirit, he said, I have never drunk in a place so far away before. Keep those two pikes of yours close to your side. The veteran, Gennard spoke with a frown, they may pounce on us at any moment. Thales' lips curled up as he brought out his skills of engaging in small talk with others. It had been lying dormant in his memories. Mr. Castellan, when did you open Hero Tavern? Why did you name it as such? It's been 20 years since I opened it. Castellan watched as Brian filled the mugs with a lackadaisical expression and brought 3 of them to the bar counter. He had Brian bring the other mugs to the others on a tray. I got injured and I retired. Then, I returned to my hometown to open a tavern. As to why I called it Hero Tavern, hey, my wife was the one who gave it such a boring name. Thales touched the wooden mug, which was half the size of his head, then rationally decided not to touch it. Oh, by the way, when I entered the village, I noticed that there were all sorts of food tied on the trees near the entrance. What is that for? The day before the bitter cold winter is about to arrive, Castellan yawned and brought them a few plates of black bread. The bread did not stir up any form of appetite in the others when they saw it. That is a present to the mountains. Accustomed to the black bread, Tolja and Kentvita picked it up and ate it as they drank the rye wine. The latter was even looking at the distressed WYA, who did not know how to eat the bread. He was looking at WYA as if he was watching a good show. It's best that you eat some of it, Kentvita said flatly, we have to press on in the afternoon, and we'll only set up camp at night. Constellations who have lived comfortable lives, Kentvita laughed at them mockingly in his heart. This is Hero Tavern's signature dish and a Northland village staple made from common coarse grain. WYA stared at the black bread in front of him with a frown. Putre sighed and picked up the bread. Looks like this is our food for today's lunch. Perhaps Kentvita is doing this intentionally. He's either testing the prince's attitude, or perhaps, taking revenge on the prince for giving him the cold shoulder. It's one of the two. Yet soon, everyone discovered to their surprise that the noble second prince of Constellation, Prince Thales Jadastar grabbed a thick and hard piece of black bread and bit down on it without any hesitation. It made it seem like he was not eating something that was difficult to swallow, but present for the mountains. Thales chewed on the tough bread and asked curiously in a muffled tone, the day before the bitter cold winter. The taste is not bad. I can actually bite through just by chewing on it. It's not like the black bread from the Brotherhood. When it gets really bad, we even have to use fire to roast it. Castellan's expression changed. He looked at Thales, and his gaze was increasingly filled with interest. The day before the bitter cold winter is a natural phenomenon unique to the Northland. At this time, the Northland will welcome the coldest time of the year. Daytime will be drastically cut short. The people who venture out must wear incredibly thick, fur-lined jackets and have enough materials to keep the fire going, and they cannot leave too far into the distance. The time where they can work outdoors will be limited to 3 hours. Putre observed with a strange expression on his face as Thales ate with gusto. I have been wandering outside all this while, and gotten myself a hard set of teeth as well as an iron stomach due to my adventures, but His Highness. WYA ate the bread with a long face, and only felt like hurling. However, when he saw that Ralph was enjoying the bread, he gained his appetite once more as his competitive spirit was instantly lit up. The day before the bitter cold winter will last for several weeks if it's short, 1 month if it's long, Poutre continued saying, as for the presents to the mountains. Those are gifts for the gods. The tavern's owner, the old castellan, grinned and continued, we will hang the first game we obtain during the day or the first food we touch on the tree. It will belong entirely to the gods, only the travelers who are forced to venture out during the day before the bitter cold winter can partake of it, because it is by the gods' grace. Gods, Thales swallowed the bread. Which god is it? Sunset, bright moon, dark night. In his memories, the more popular gods who had their own temples in Eternal Star City were these three. But Castellan grinned, not them. What we commemorate is the god that has been worshipped since the ancient times in Northland and even the world. He takes care of the land and the mountain ranges, and he is a generous god that protects travelers in the wild. The people call him the Master of Mountains. Constellation, Eternal Star City's Western District, entrance to Western City Police Station. I'm sorry, Captain Cohen Carabayan has applied for a month's leave. Western City Police Station Secretary, Miss Jorah, looked coldly at the young brunette with short hair who was standing in front of her. I mean, at least a month. She's taller than me. Her legs are longer than mine. Her A is bigger than mine. Miss Jorah thought furiously. Thankfully, my chest is bigger than hers. Then, Miss Jorah straightened her figure, which she was proud of. She twirled her long, red hair, and said proudly, if you're looking for him, you can leave a message, I see him often, I can deliver your message to him. And, she isn't as feminine as I am. She looks like a boy. Miss Jorah sized up the brunette with a disapproving stare. The woman furrowed her brows slowly and said, is that so? He's not around. Yes, and she speaks in such a crude manner, she doesn't seem like a woman at all. As Miss Jorah thought about this, her mood instantly became better. Yup, that is the voice of a drake, she would absolutely not admit that it sounded heroic. The brunette remained silent for a moment as she looked at Miss Jorah. Miss Jorah felt a little embarrassed. Shortly after, the brunette lowered her head and looked at the sword of the Twin Towers emblem on her right hand. Her lips then curled up into a smile. Very well, please pass this message to him. The brunette looked at Miss Jorah's expression and said with a teasing tone. Just say. Under the secretary's impatient gaze, the brunette licked her lips. The woman who laid in his bosom that day in Red Street Market misses him. Miss Jorah's expression changed, as if she had been struck by lightning. Red Street Market. Lay. In his bosom. Woman. Misses him. Miss Jorah glared at the woman in disbelief. She frowned while her expression continued to change. How could it be? This woman. With the handsome Captain Cohen. They. Jolly Charlton immediately snickered. Ha ha ha. Alright, I was just joking. Under the secretary's murderous gaze, the descendant of the assassin's flower laughed while she clutched her abdomen and waved her hand. I only met that blonde police officer once. And saved his life. You like him, have a crush on him, you love him so much that you could die, you want to have his children, yada yada. As the secretary once again gave her a strange look, Jolly shook her head. I don't care about that, I don't want to become your competitor or your rival in love either. I'm just here to ask him for help. Don't worry, he isn't my type. The former bartender put on a bright smile. In a rare show, the secretary blushed. She looked at Jolly's sincere gaze and was speechless. She suddenly blanked out and did not know what to do at that moment. They remained silent for about 10 seconds or more. All right, Miss Jorah turned her head away in embarrassment. The red flush on her cheeks had yet to disappear. She spoke resignedly, the truth is, Captain Cohen has returned to the Tower of Eradication. We can use messenger pigeons to communicate with him. You can write him a letter, and then... Jolly laughed. All right, I'll write him a letter. The young, former bartender nodded, as though she was thinking of something. Thank you, Miss Jorah. Honestly, if it isn't anything too troublesome, the secretary said in slight embarrassment, perhaps I can help you. After all, you're Cohen's friend as well. Even though I'm just a secretary in the police station, I know plenty of people. My brother works for the royal family, and he gets in touch with plenty of important people. Then, you won't have to look for Captain Cohen. Miss Jorah clenched her fist in her heart. Did you think that it would end just because you said you didn't like him? What a joke. Don't underestimate a woman's obsession, whether it's her own or that of her rival in love. Jolly looked at Jorah in surprise, then she cracked a smile. You won't be able to help me with this. Jolly shook her head resignedly. You're still too. Jolly suddenly stopped speaking. It looked as if she had thought of something. Miss Jorah had on an expectant expression. Perhaps, you can actually help me, she said slowly. Jorah, you're the secretary of the police station. You can see all the files, bounties and information in there. Could you help me keep an eye out on some information? Miss Jorah smiled and nodded. Of course, if it isn't something top secret, what do you want to know? Jolly let out a long sigh and said in a low tone, I want to check out the location where weapons are smuggled from Constellation to other countries for the past few years, especially those related to Black Street Brotherhood, and a man named Rhoda. Miss Jorah took out a pen and paper. Also, Jala hesitated, but in the end, she said these words, I want to find 3 children, they have very distinct characteristics and they may have been kidnapped by the Brotherhood. But, they are not in Eternal Star City. Miss Jorah lifted her head in curiosity. One of them is a 10-year-old boy called Cindy. He's slightly larger than the average child. Another one is a small girl with a round scar left from a burn on her face. She's Korea, about 4 or 5 years old. And one more is a 7 or 8-year-old named Ryan. He doesn't have a right arm. Is that all? Miss Jorah nodded. I'll go back and see whether there are any notices or reports regarding cracks on human traffickers. Wait, Jala lifted her head and said with a serious expression, I'm also looking for another boy. He went missing near Red Street Market and could have possibly fallen into the hands of Blood Bottle Gang. He has black hair, gray eyes, and is about 7 to 8 years old. Jala's eyes dimmed. He is a boy that doesn't seem like a normal boy. Miss Jorah lifted her head in surprise. He's a little too smart and mature. Jala lowered her eyes and continued explaining. Is that so? A mature child, The secretary shrugged and continued taking notes. My brother says that he has seen children like that before, a boy and a girl. Anyway, I'll keep an eye out for you. Chapter 112. Constellation, the Dragon, and the Long-Gone Empire. The Master of Mountains. Thales was stunned. Why have I not heard of this before? Chuckling, Poutre explained, because this god does not have a spokesperson in the human world. Hence, it does not have a temple or a church. Even records of the manifestation of its presence or power are scanty. It only exists in stories and folktales passed down orally by the people. For travelers who traverse the mountains and plains, worshipping the Master of Mountains enables them to keep their mind at ease as well as stay safe when traveling far away from home. So, the act of gifting to the mountains is more of a ceremony, a means of helping travelers to overcome the severe cold. Passed down orally. During the era of the ancient empire, the Master of Mountains was once a shared belief among all human beings. Not just among us Northlanders, but also all of you, the Rudalians in the middle of the world who built the empire, the Coluntians in the southwestern Thornland and Dragon-Kissed Land, the barren-boned people in the Great Desert, the bandits in the Near East, the Netanies, the Celes who pasture in the eastern plains, those dark-skinned Crimson Earthlings in the extreme south as well as the Cassines who navigate the islands with great ease. Apart from the Far Easterners, almost all humans knew and acknowledged the existence of the Master of Mountains. The old Castellan swigged a mouthful of ale and spoke with much emotion from behind the bar counter. Now however, apart from the countryside in Northland where people are plain and honest, and where these simple beliefs are still visible, the name of the Master of Mountains has pretty much disappeared, just like countless other precious Northlandic traditions. Only large temples enshrined in power and money are left. The Rudalians and Northlanders. Thales lowered his head in curiosity and started to eat another piece of bread. I remember the title of the Supreme King of Constellation included. Yes, we all know. Archduke Lampard's advisor, Viscount Kentvida laughed mischievously and tauntingly. He then said, he is the suzerain of the Rudalians and Northlanders in the Western Peninsula. But I sincerely suggest that you omit that second part in Extit. Northlanders have never acknowledged your rulership over us. From my knowledge, 2/3 of the Northland province during the Ancient Empire's era was within the borders of Extit, while the remaining 1/3 was in the northern territory of Constellation. Those Constellatiates called themselves Northlanders and acknowledged the rulership of the Supreme King. Poutre sharply refuted. That's where the problem lies. Viscount Kentvida tapped the bar counter in contemplation. Northland belongs to the Northlanders. Why should they be under the rule of Constellation and under the rule of a Rudalian king? Thales suddenly realized that Northland stood for the Northland province from 1,000 years ago during the era of the Ancient Empire. It was a geographical concept. Northlanders was a concept that existed even before the empire was established and it referred to the humans who lived on that land. As for Extit, which was only established after the Battle of Eradication, that concept was far less important compared to Northland, and it even much less so for the concept of Northlanders. It was just like Constellation, a kingdom that only existed after the Battle of Eradication. In truth, the people who lived on the land that Constellation was built on were known as the Rudalians, thousands of years ago. It appeared that they were the main race of the ancient empire. Today, Northlanders and the Rudalians were scattered throughout both the Black Sand region of Extit and the northern territory of Constellation. Thales lowered his head and casually looked at the wheat residue that settled at the bottom of his glass. He was suddenly reminded of Sunset Pub in the underground market of Eternal Star City. Jala the cheeky, female bartender, the plump and fierce-looking cook, Edmund and the owner of the pub who had only appeared once or twice when Thales was there. Why, because of history, Poutre said faintly, presently, whether it is in Black Sand region or the Northern Territory, the Rudalians and Northlanders have lived together for many years. They no longer create any distinction among themselves. HMPH, it's because all of you seized the land and people from Northland, Kenvida refuted, you seized Cold Castle 400 years ago and the lonely old tower 200 years ago from us. Your northern territory is our southern land. Listening to the argument between Kenvida and Putre, Caslin, the owner of the tavern, could not help but let out a laughter that perplexed those around him. A chill ran down Thales' spine as he heard their conversation. So, this is what the Extichans think. He thought about the soldiers' manner and attitude towards them when they first entered Lampard's military camp. He finally understood why. Constellation wanted to defend its land in the north, while Extit wanted to recapture the territory, which belonged to the Northlanders. Both parties were battling for their own justice, and it was ironic indeed. These were all things he would not have been able to hear within Constellation. Putre chuckled, if you really want to talk about how Northland only belongs to the Northlanders, then we have the Arun family in Constellation's northern territory, who once ruled the entire Northland province on the Emperor's behalf. HMPH, the senseless arrogance of Constellations. Viscount Kenvida snorted coldly, in the end, the lot of you still go back to talking about the ancient empire, don't you? It perished a long time ago. Are you still hung up on the supreme power and glory of the Pegasus throne? Do you miss those emperors who controlled the entire world with the wave of their sleeves? Do you miss that era where the map of the kingdom spread from one end of the room to another? The empire was the most precious legacy, the most glorious page, and the most powerful existence in human history. There is no doubt about that, Putre answered coldly, even though it does not exist anymore, its splendor never faded and is still cherished today. Ha, I almost forgot. Kenvida raised both of his hands and laughed at Thales in a taunting manner. The empire shall last, so long as the stars remain. Is that so, your highness? Thales shrugged and smiled at him. Do not joke about the royal family, Putre spoke in a cold tone. His bloodline was once at the top of the world, witnessing the rise and fall of the human race. Bloodline, Kenvida snorted. Northlanders do not believe in bloodlines. Heroes who can bear the weight of the kingdom and its people automatically become king. The next moment, the Viscount of Exted narrowed his eyes and spoke in a serious tone, Your Highness, listen up. The empire ruled by the so-called imperial family you were born in left the world with nothing but an extremely chaotic nightmare. Thank you for your advice. Thales scratched his head awkwardly and gave a hollow laugh. That's certainly a new point of view. New, Kenvida stared at him and said plainly, Have you heard the story of Quizo Lampard, Your Highness? Quizo Lampard, an ancestor of the Lampard family, the revolutionary king, Thales answered enthusiastically. You don't have to hear about it from the subordinate of an archduke. Putre was about to speak when he realized that Thales was raising his hand to stop him from speaking. Please continue, Viscount Kenvida. Thales said, smiling, I am very interested in all knowledge. Putre and Kenvida glanced at Thales in surprise. Do you know about Archduke Trendita from the Reformation Tower? He's one of Extit's 10 archdukes, Kenvida said softly after ruminating for a while. The Reformation Tower neighbors the lonely old tower of your kingdom. It is ruled by a family of knights who are famous in Northland history, the Trendita family. Their family's symbol is a blade radiating bright light. I don't really know about him. Sorry, I am only 7 years old. Thales shook his head in embarrassment. But I am very willing to listen to your story. What happened to the Trendita family? How is it related to Quizo Lampard? It has nothing to do with the Trendita family, but more to do with their territory, the Reformation Tower and its periphery. Kenvida sighed and said, that was Northland's far eastern land and also one of the Sighing Mountains' entrances. During the era of the ancient empire, before the peninsulas were separated, the Reformation Tower was once the epitome of barbaric acts and chaos. Do you know how the Reformation Tower got its name? Thales shook his head in cooperation. During the age of the ancient empire, that place was once a prison for those in exile, and it also acted as an execution field. Everyone who went there needed to be reformed. Kenvida shook his head and said, Reformation Tower, unfortunately, most of the prisoners there did not leave the place alive to reform their lives. Thales nodded his head, deep in thought. And in that time, they once put a famous person behind the prison's bars, Quizo Lampard. Upon hearing that, Thales furrowed his brows slightly. Quizo Lampard. He knew about this person when Gilbert filled him in on the world's history. Quizo Lampard was the Reformation King of Northland. He was the man who started the first ever internal rife in the ancient empire. However, according to the books, he was a bandit who roamed freely across the northern pine forest in Northland. In a robbery, he accidentally killed a government official of the empire, and was hence captured by the empire. His accomplices then raided the execution field and rescued him. Driven into a corner, Quizo knew that he would not be able to escape the empire's pursuit and capture for his entire life. As a result, he went all out in retaliation. He acted on the dissatisfaction of the Northlanders towards Duke Arun's harsh governance and spread rumors to divide Northland. This threw Northland into great chaos. After that, he embarked on a journey to rebel against the empire. In the end, however, his rebellion was easily wiped out by the empire's army next to the lonely old tower. The empire's first ever internal rife started because of this and things became increasingly violent. But today, Kenvida was telling him a completely different story. Kenvida faintly said, Rumor has it that the Lampod family is the descendant of Takmik, the deceased king of the north from the barbaric era, which was before the orcs invaded. And over 1,500 years ago, Quizo Lampod was only an ordinary woodcutter in the ancient empire's Northland province. However, he had excellent skills, he was bold as well as righteous, and he provided help to the poor and weak. He was renowned in the area. Even the Duke of the Northland province, Arund, knew about his existence. This was the empire's most glorious era, or so it was called. The elves compromised with the empire and the dwarves became craftsmen, the orcs fled behind the glaciers and the dragons became extinct, only the Far East was not conquered. So, when the battle to conquer the Far East was going strong, Quizo was enlisted into the army. He headed into the battlefield joyfully as he was filled with glorious purpose and pride to be battling for the empire. Due to Quizo's unmatched bravery, fighting capabilities, and prestige among the Northlanders, he moved all the way up until the empire sealed him as a count and appointed him as the general of the Northland army. A chill ran down Thales' spine. This story was completely different from what he remembered. Under the great efforts of Quizo and other army groups, the Far Easterners were steadily losing ground and becoming entrenched in a besieged city. There was only the Kirin holy capital left, but its army was decimated and its food supply was depleted. It was basically lifeless and on the verge of falling into the Empire's hands. The Empire's heroic undertaking to unite the world was almost becoming a reality. Because of this, the Emperor was immersed in paramount supremacy. His desire became more and more undue and his demands were almost endless. He never stopped drafting forced laborers, and tax charges increased with each passing day. As the best source of troops, the Northland province was the first to bear the brunt. At one point, the Northlanders could not take it anymore. They started refusing to pay their taxes and escaping military services. They chased away the Emperor's tax collectors and started treating the Empire's authority with fury. They treated the Empire with verbal abuse instead of devotion and obedience. In Duke Arund, the Emperor's slave could not collect enough taxes or draft enough forced laborers anymore. Not to mention, there were numerous tax evasion incidents. Even the Arund family's soldiers were often sour-faced due to this. Hence, the Emperor's slaves thought of a solution: look for Northland's most renowned person, the Northland army's commander, Quizo, to talk to his own townsfolk. He was having days off and recuperating at home at that time. Caslin sighed and Putre remained silent. Kentbida, on the other hand, continued talking. They urged Quizo to become their colleague and join them in pressing for taxes as well as drafting forced laborers. However, Quizo did not agree. They then urged him to make a declaration to convince the Northlanders to submit to the Empire. Quizo still did not agree. They then ordered the general to help them find the protesters from Northland in the name of the Empire. But Quizo did not agree either. This is what Quizo said: I am loyal to the Empire, but I am a Northlander. In the end, the Emperor found out about this incident. The Emperor issued an edict and there were 2 words written on it. Kentvida's gaze became extremely icy as he plainly said, choose one. Thales could only feel a chill running down his spine. Choose one. The Empire. Northland. Choose one. The next thing the Northlanders knew, Quizo was banished to the Reformation Tower until he proved his loyalty towards the Empire once again. The Emperor could not face the fact that his own general could not do this. However, a whole year passed and Quizo did not relent. At the same time, the Northlanders who learned about his imprisonment were boiling with resentment. In the end, hearing reports about his people's discontent every day and having to endure the Duke's apology for not collecting enough taxes made the Emperor fed up with Quizo's stubbornness. He decided to make an example out of him and deter the people of Northland using punishment as well as terror to reiterate the dignity of the Empire. Consequently, Quizo Lampod was brought to the execution field. There, he watched helplessly as his son was beheaded, his wife garroted, his daughter hung, and his friends flogged to death, all of this just because Quizo was unwilling to respond to the Emperor's edict. Finally, when it was Quizo's turn, the furious Northlanders and Quizo's subordinates broke into the Reformation Tower and charged into the execution field. They killed the Empire's soldiers and rescued Quizo. When news broke out, the entire of Northland was shaken. The people picked up their weapons again as they donned their armor and gathered beside Quizo, who was on the verge of death. But this time, it was not to enlist in the Empire's army, they were going to rebel against the ruthless ruling of the Empire. I'm sure you know what happened next. Thales pondered about the story. This is so much different compared to what the books in Constellation say. Contemplating, Thales said quietly, yes, the Reformation King battled until the end, and with his last remaining 300 people. However, when it came to the end of the story, Kentvida still gave Thales a surprise. There is one small difference: Kentvida cut Thales off as his eyes shone brightly. He did not battle until the end. Thales was stunned. Quizo did not have plans to engage in battle at all. From the very beginning, he dismissed most of the rebel soldiers. He only led the last 300 people who refused to leave and launched a last assault on the 3 main armies from Lonely Old Peak. That was the only battle in Quizo's so-called Reformation. It was more of a silent protest towards the Emperor, and not a rebellion towards the Empire, which he had been loyal to all his life, was it not? After Quizo died, every single family in Northland lit candles and honored him as king according to ancient traditions from the era of the feudal kings. The Reformation king was probably a title Quiso was unwilling to bear even till his death. This is the true story of Quiso Lampad, the Reformation king. Many extichans are very familiar with it. Do you understand now, descendant of the empire? Kenvida said plainly, do you see what the empire has actually left for Northland? Caslin watched Thales' reaction with considerable interest. Fortunately, everyone else were sitting at round tables a few meters away from them. Or else, Thales reckoned that there would soon be another pub fight between the constellations and the extichans. An elaborately modified story. Poutre snorted and laughed. I wonder though, how do you know the emperor's edict so well down to every single word? Go ahead and be sarcastic, citizen of the empire. The only thing on your mind is the empire's glory anyway. Kenvida's gaze was filled with hatred. He continued speaking, what did the empire give to the world? Years of military service, battle expeditions without rest and heavy taxes that knew no limits. From the West Billow Cliff to the Crimson Soil, and the Thornland to the Far East, everyone knows about the empire's ruthlessness and harshness. Greedy, degenerate officials of various ranks and folly ruled in a cruel as well as pressing manner. The so-called mighty people of the empire had long since become decadent and rotten from top to bottom, from the inside out, from the Pegasus throne to the expedition troops, and from the Praetorian guards to the city gate officials. Racial conflicts turned into increasingly violent, ugly and dark religious oppression. How many people died from utterly unjustifiable and cruel torture courtesy of the empire's secret forces? And how many people died for heresy under the bright God Church? Did you know that ancient beliefs such as the Master of Mountains, the Maiden Guardian of the Ocean and the Prairie Godfather disappeared because they were banned by the ancient empire? All of this happened amid conspiracies that were jointly plotted by the emperor and the bright God Church. Then there was the Northern Temple of Knights, which was forcibly demolished by the emperor 1,000 years ago. It was the cradle and holy land where knights originated. It was the legendary place where humankind worked together to fight against the ancient orcs. Kenvida drank a mouthful of ale and sneered. Citizen of the empire, stop basking in past glories. You excite yourselves with false prosperity, but all of you have no idea how hideous your position in history is. You can continue with your own thoughts. However, history cannot be changed, even until now, Poutre said in disdain. I can only see your carriages speeding on the driveways built by the empire. There are no exceptions from when the king goes out on trips to when the people leave their homes. Your currency follows the gold, silver and copper standards set by the empire. These little coins are stabilizing your kingdom's economy and your people's livelihood, preventing your kingdom from falling back to how it was in the era of the feudal kings. No matter how much of the northern accent and styles are in your language and texts, they still originated from the empire's ancient or common language. From birth to death, what all of you mutter is part of the empire's culture and tradition. Your art, poetry and music are influenced by the empire's glory. No matter how hopeless the extichans are known to be in terms of culture, all of you have to admit to this. Not only that, your military force is still following the systems established by the empire. You still divide soldiers into brigades, battalions, guards and squads. You divide nobles according to the empire's style, into dukes, counts, viscounts, barons and lords. Without the empire, Northland would probably still be in a state of disunity, backwards and savage. What does that prove? Kenvida rudely cut him off. If you want to label the things that the empire forced upon us as favors, and feel self-satisfied over it. Forced, Poutre seemed to feel provoked. The feudal king's knights in Northland went under the command of great Emperor Camelot Carlos almost at the same time as the core of the ancient chauvinistic country's feudal king. All of you were the earliest supporters of the great emperor and the most active ones in the establishment of the empire. Very well, Kenvida snorted coldly and said, now, we, the children of Northern Wind and Dragon no longer need that diabolical empire. We rely on our own efforts. Please throw away your arrogance, citizens of the empire. I have seen the Northern Wind plenty of times, Poutre said faintly. As for dragons, if you are referring to the one embroidered on Extit's flag, HMPH, the material is quite good. The meaning of the dragon on Extit's flag does not lie in its existence. After all, we do not rely on a legendary beast to protect this kingdom, Kenvida said solemnly. He then glanced at the constellations as he raised his glass and took a large swig, smiling meaningfully. It symbolizes the beliefs and qualities the extichans had when they established the kingdom. They are teachings that Raikaru, the Northland hero taught us during the Battle of Eradication: force, patience, strength, tenacity, pride, persistence and, never surrender, even in the face of a huge monster like the Empire. What do all of you have left? Kenvida sneered and said, constellation is only an antique. It does not have any meaning of existence in itself. It only exists as proof of a bygone history, calling back spirits of the dead from a kingdom that has long perished. If you want to label the act of carrying the torch of humanity's most precious past as calling back spirits of the dead, go ahead. Poutre shook his head mockingly. At least, we care about these things. What does Northland have left? You condemn the Empire for dismantling the Temple of Knights, but the truth is, Extit and the so-called Northland have even lost the mastery of the Northland military sword style. Kenfida was about to reply when Thales heaved a long sigh. Kenfida and Poutre turned towards the second prince of Constellation at the same time. Did all of you know that even though Poutre and Viscount Kenfida are from Constellation and Exted respectively, I have found two of your biggest similarities through this unpleasant encounter between the both of you? Poutre and Kenfida were both stunned. So, what are they? Caslin, the owner of the tavern, had been watching the entire affair and he was the one who spoke. He tapped his chin with profound interest and asked Thales, what are the similarities? Thales raised his eyebrows and shrugged. While both of you are speaking on behalf of your respective stands, there is only one thing on your minds. It is something very cliché. Poutre revealed a puzzled expression on his face whereas Kenfida furrowed his brows slightly. The Empire, Thales said softly. He then ate the last mouthful of bread. Poutre and Kenfida froze at the same time. Caslin clapped and laughed out loud. Ha ha ha, such an interesting conclusion. What about the second similarity? The second one, chewing the rye bread, Thales muttered, even though both of them said so many things about the Empire. None of them have actually seen the Empire with their own eyes, whether it's the last Empire from 600 years ago, or the ancient Empire from over 1,000 years ago. Caslin's laughter became increasingly louder. Poutre and Kenfida's expressions on the other hand, darkened. Well said, second prince of Constellation. Caslin jubilantly smacked his hand on the table as he laughed loudly and looked at Thales. They have never seen the Empire. Thank you for the support. Thales shrugged. On one hand, this shows that the Empire's influence is indeed profound and lasting. He looked at the two men. On the other hand, the both of you were arguing with points based on your imagination. Poutre and Kenfida froze again. Both of you were debating over what each of you imagined the Empire to be like. Thales spread his hands. Both of you presumably built your imagination of the Empire based on your own reality, like your feelings right now, your opinions on the Empire, and your views on history. The two men who were arguing looked at each other and turned away. Get over it, lads. Caslin, the old man, shook his head. Apart from pompous families and loathsome scholars, no one remembers these ancient legends, glorious pasts, lost history and sacred traditions anymore. He pointed out the door. However, these gifts to the mountains prevent the youngsters who are outside in this bitter cold winter from freezing and starving to death, and that's enough. As long as it is useful to humans, its existence is meaningful. The Master of Mountains did not disappear. He lives on within the slits of every day before the bitter cold winter and within the gratitude of travelers who take the food from the trees. The same goes for the dragon and the Empire. Caslin sneered. Poutre and Kenfida did not speak anymore. However, they had unpleasant expressions on their faces. Thales broke into bright smile. Click, asterisk. Caslin snapped his fingers. Bang, asterisk. Brian, the tavern worker with a burned scar on his face, appeared. As usual, he had an unpleasant expression and looked as if everyone owed him money for their alcohol. Under his boss's signal, he rudely slammed a glass of alcohol onto the counter and pushed it towards Thales. The alcohol was obviously colored differently than the rest. He stared fiercely at Thales before turning and going back into the scullery. Thales raised his head in shock. Top-notch rye wine, specially supplied by Hero Tavern, the old man said cheekily under Thales' astonished gaze. It's supplied by an old comrade in arms from Prestige Orchid region. There is only a limited quantity every day. It's different from those low-quality alcohol they're drinking. This is for what you said earlier. Thales widened his eyes and looked at the old man with white hair. He then lowered his head and looked at the alcohol inside the glass. Don't hesitate, lad, drink it all up. Caslin flashed the strong, powerful muscle on his right arm, which showed no signs of aging at all. There are two sets of criteria in judging whether a man is good. 1. Whether they wave their axes with enough force. 2. Whether they drink with enough briskness. Man, I am only 7 years old. Looking at the wine glass, which was as big as his head, Thales widened his eyes and awkwardly repeated what he said when dealing with the Archduke of Black Sand. You know children cannot drink alcohol. It's bad for health. That is bullshit. Caslin flicked his wrist in a dismissive gesture and bared his yellow teeth. Under Poutre's extremely unamused expression, the old man slapped Thales on the shoulder. His totally unrestrained force made the latter stagger. Being 7 is all the more reason for you to drink. Child, you will never grow up if you don't drink. Chapter 113, The Intersection of Fate. Under old Caslin's extremely pitying gaze, Thales sighed in relief after he had wriggled his way out of drinking that cup of the rye wine using every possible tactic. They rested for 15 minutes before Viscount Kenfida turned his head around and gave the Fire Knight, Tolja, a nod as a signal. Make your preparations, Tolja ordered at his soldiers. We are going to depart. We must reach to the Prestige Orchid region before tomorrow night. Extit's military officers and soldiers all stood up after they heard their commanding officer's words. They left some money for the wine and walked out of the tavern. On the other hand, the Constellations looked to Thales. The boy glanced at Poutre and shrugged before he jumped off the bar counter. But just as he waved at the old Caslin and was ready to leave. Wait, little brat, Caslin left the bar counter and walked up to Thales. Thales only noticed that this old man, Caslin, had an extremely tall build. He was almost 7 feet tall. Thales had no choice but to strain his neck to its limit so that he could look up at him. Fortunately, Caslin crouched down before Thales. "You're going to apologize before King Nuven, right?" The old Caslin said slowly. "I have also heard that you are going to repay the misfortune Prince Maria faced in Constellation." "Yes," Thales heaved a sigh, "to see if King Nuven will have any interest in my intellect." The emotions in Caslin's eyes shifted slightly when he looked at Thales. "When I was your age," the old man sighed, "I would only follow behind my older brother and chase sparrows." Thales smiled a little. But before Thales could say anything, Caslin had started talking to himself. Damn nobles and their hideous mess of political conspiracies. They would never be sparing and merciful, right? Whether you're 7 years old or 17 years old, God knows how Prince Maria died, such a shame. That was a good, young lad. A surprised expression appeared on Thales' face. "Thank you for your understanding, Sir Caslin." Caslin stared intently at him, until Thales put on an awkward expression and pointed at the door. "Listen," old Caslin said faintly, "I once served in the army under Nuven. To a certain extent, I am kind of familiar with him." "This tavern owner knows King Nuven." Thales was slightly stunned. He turned around and looked at Kenvida, who was not far from him. "Why do they want to bring me here? Is it really to rest midway?" Caslin sighed gently. He was a good king when he was young, the epitome of a sturdy Walton man. "I still remember the scene where Nuven Walton stood on the 38th century grounds, and waved his hammer and chain at the attacking orcs. He was forthright, generous, lenient, and fair at the time. He would use his body as a shield to protect a nameless soldier before an orc's axe. Every warrior was proud to die for him." "Oh," Thales' eyes brightened, "this is very good. At least it seems he is not a king who would simply order that my head be chopped off." But people change. The old Caslin exhaled a breath and his gaze started to blur and drift off. "Nuven is also human. He can grow old, and can also be confused by slanderous talk and sex. There will also be a day when he becomes influenced by desire and impulse. Although Rikaru Extit's blood flowed through his veins, he is, after all, not a perfect dragon or hero. Especially, since he is still a father who has lost his son." Thales could not help but to stare blankly at him. Caslin lowered his head and gazed intently at Thales. "Be careful, second prince of Constellation. Extit has the great dragon as its flag, but in the past 600 years, we have only worshipped the greatness of the great dragon. We have learned of the arrogance of the great dragon, but have thrown the great dragon's wisdom and sagacity to the back of our heads. We might call ourselves the children of the northern wind and the dragon, but the shackles of the empire on us is no lesser than what the Constellations have." "What do you mean?" Thales widened his eyes. "Do you mean that the internal circumstances of Extit may be even worse than we imagined?" "Take care of yourself, kid." Caslin only shook his head and lightly put his hand onto Thales' shoulder. "Since you have paid for the wine but did not drink it, consider this little advice a gift from me to you." Thales could only spread his hands. "Thank you for your advice." At any rate, he still had to face Nuven the Seventh. What a pity it is not that useful. What will come, will come. "Oh, right." Caslin hesitated for a moment and suddenly exhaled a breath. He laughed. "If you run into a dangerous situation that you cannot resolve no matter what in Extit, a problem so great that even King Nuven cannot save you, King Nuven would also be unable to save me." Suspicion grew in Thales' heart. What does it mean? In Dragon Cloud City, there is a butcher's shop with a dagger on its signboard, on West Express Avenue. Caslin snorted in laughter. At Thales' furrowed brows, he lowered his voice and said, "The owner is a Far Easterner with the last name Gu. He owes me a favor from years ago. That really audacious fellow will always dare to do some things that are against the law. If you want to seek his help, all you have to say is just, 650. Under Thales' surprised gaze, old Caslin once again forcefully slapped his shoulder. The second prince staggered again. While grimacing, Thales saw the old man in front of him slowly stand up and gave a hearty laugh boldly as he said, "Come again next time. Remember to drink my rye wine. That is the only true sign of a man." Before Poutre could show his murderous gaze, Thales had left with an awkward smile on his face. Kenvida furrowed his brows as he let his gaze follow Thales and the Extichian until they disappeared into the distance. Then he slowly walked to the bar counter and turned to the old Caslin. "You've seen for yourself, the future king of Constellation." Kenvida's eyes were glinting coldly. "Look at how different he is from the other children, how mature and shrewd he is. What were we doing when we were just 7 years old? What was King Nuven doing when he was 7 years old?" The old Caslin stared at the tavern door while he slowly said, "The gaze of this child is indeed different from the others." He could not see any sign of reverence or nervousness in that child's eyes. There was only interest and curiosity filled within them. There were also an enigmatic confidence and resoluteness in his eyes, as if he had never been wavered before. This was not the gaze a terrified child thousands of miles away from home should have. This is the opponent Extit must face next. I am almost certain that when he grows up, he will definitely become a powerful enemy of Extit. Kenvida curved his lips and tapped the counter. But unfortunately, the Archduke cannot attack him directly. Since when have we Northlanders become cowards who are afraid of 7-year-old children and scheme against them? Caslin said disdainfully in a deep voice, to maintain a country in conspiracy and fear, this is something only the Empire would do when it is in turmoil. Of course, Archduke Lampard's advisor said softly, for this, we need a better king, not an old, incompetent person who takes credit without doing anything, and not a hot-blooded youngster still wet behind the ears either. HMPH. Caslin snatched up 2 wine glasses and placed them in the window to the back kitchen. So Chapman Lampard is really a good candidate. I believe you love Extit, the Dragon Nation, very much. Kenvida gazed intently at him. Even though King Nuvan removed you from the White Blade Guards. Hey, the old man seemed particularly displeased with that statement. Nuvan did not remove me. I was the one who chose to leave. Kenvida stayed quiet and only stared at the old man. Is that true? After a few seconds, he slowly asked, so, do you still disagree? Ha, Caslin shook his head in derision. I am only a tavern owner, what matter can I agree to? Ground Shaker Caslin, as the previous leader of the White Blade Guards, your reputation is still spread among them. Your story is still being sung and passed around the 38th century ground to this day, Kenvida said languidly, we only need one word from you. Why, you want me to use my influence and contacts to convince my former subordinates to side with Chapman? Caslin gave out a snort of laughter in disdain. I believe you will make the choice that benefits Extit most. Kenvida had a calm expression on his face, but his gaze was sharp and penetrating when he stared at the old Caslin with fixed eyes. Caslin Lampard, you are, after all, the Archduke's uncle. Caslin raised his head abruptly. You are also the White Blade Guard's most famous commander since Extit was established, Kenvida said faintly. In the approaching storm, it is inevitable that you will be unable to retain your values and righteousness. Of course, maybe not only to convince your former subordinates, maybe you will need to take it a step further, Kenvida thought to himself, after all, the White Blade Guards are the king's personal guards, and they are tasked with safety of the common elected king of Extit. Do you know what this reminds me of? Caslin interrupted his thoughts. Kenvida curved his lips up politely and gave him a smile. The old man stared back at him coldly. Quizo Lampard was asked by the Empire to convince the people of his hometown to cooperate with the Empire, to pay their taxes obediently, and to not resist anymore. If I say no, is that Chapman brat going to banish me to the Reformation Tower as well? Kenvida furrowed his brows. Just go back and tell my nephew, Caslin said slowly but resolutely, FCK Lampard. All right, Kenvida sighed and shook his head, unsurprised. Then, you should at least be able to help with the second favor. Caslin snorted coldly, all you always care about is interest, right? This time, Kenvida narrowed his eyes, it is about that prince. Caslin put away a few more glasses again without paying any attention to the Viscount. There is someone who wants to assassinate that prince in Extit. Regardless of whether it is to frame the Archduke by it, or to disrupt the situation, Kenvida's face darkened as he said, they even began using a military spy lurking in our mystic gun unit. Caslin lifted his head and said impolitely, you know I hate dirty politics the most. I do not want to know any. The following matter is relevant to you, Kenvida interrupted in a stern voice, the Archduke sent a letter yesterday. We managed to investigate and find some clues about the military spy from the black market but we got cut off halfway by someone. Does it concern me? Caslin said roughly. Those people who cut off our clues were using Tower of Eradication sword style, and a very different type of power of eradication. Kenvida said in a low voice, as if he was talking about a secret. But they were definitely not people from the Tower of Eradication. Caslin was stunned. Go on, the old man was becoming serious. What power of eradication? I knew you would be concerned about this, Kenvida said sharply, this is what you had mentioned a very long time ago, that hysterical and uncontrollable power of eradication. I remember that you are still working for the Tower of Eradication. Only to return a favor to Shao, Caslin revealed a reminiscence in his gaze, after all, I have already graduated years ago. But he immediately stared seriously at Kenvida. What else? The super-class swordswoman of eradication who works under us, Croce, do you still remember her? She is the daughter of your comrade, that strong young girl, she was seriously injured by their hand and she almost lost her life. She was the only one who escaped and returned. Caslin clenched his hands tightly. The trail that we tracked down was cut off. The only lead we had left was about the strange powers of eradication, Kenvida said sincerely, we need your help, even if it is for the Tower of Eradication and not for Lampard. The person who is as famous as the Grey Sword Guard, the pride of the White Blade Guards and the Tower of Eradication, Ground Shaker, Caslin Lampard. Ellipsis. A few days later in the Tower of Eradication, the House of Scion's lounge. We can be certain that the disaster swords have not completely inherited the Northland military sword style. One of the supreme class Scions, Zedai Tafner, sat on the table and said to his student, even if it is very old-fashioned, it is still a sword style numerous swordsmen and wizards have carefully researched, and the House of Science has the most complete archive preservation system. We can start from here. Alright, you can continue searching for the book here, Zedai. Cohen Carabayan looked exhausted as he leaned against the table, tapped against the table leg and rubbed his red eyes. I can't stand this anyway, but I will remember this wonderful time, the days I sneaked into the truth library with my teacher every single night. Zedai's face darkened suddenly. You are going to give up, his teacher said moodily, give up on the investigation of the disaster sword. I'm not giving up, the blonde police, Cohen, replied sourly, but do you know how many books there are in the truth library? Then, I received a letter from a beautiful lady yesterday. Cohen ignored Zedai's sour expression and yawned, I have to return a favor. Jala, this is her name. Cohen touched the letter at his bosom and curved his lips up into a smile. That cool dual sword-wielding girl. But right at that moment, a strict and cold, old voice came from behind the teacher and student pair. Zedai Tafner, Cohen Carabayan. Both Zedai and Cohen jolted at the same time. Plop, asterisk. Zedai leapt off the table awkwardly, stumbled, and fell gracelessly on the ground gracelessly. Cohen sprang from the ground nervously and hit his head on the table. The two of them were flustered. One rubbed his knee with his face scrunched up, while another touched his scalp and grimaced. They stood up with much difficulty and tried their best to stand straight. They showed their most submissive and friendly smiles as they looked towards the gray-haired old man from the far east who appeared out of nowhere, a sword hanging from his waist, and an ice-cold expression on his face. Ah, Shao, when did you return? They all said that you went to the Sharp Blade Valley to inspect. Zedai Tafner had a huge smile on his face as he bowed respectfully with clasped hands. Great Master Shao, ah, I plan to see you first for during this visit. I even brought some of Constellation's local specialties, just for you. The Constellation police officer and captain of the city defense team, Cohen Carabayan, was rubbing his hands with an obsequious look on his face. But the gray-haired old man, Shao, ignored their smiles. The table in the lounge is not for dancing. Shao glared at Zedai in his ingratiating expression. Zedai's smile became increasingly awkward because of Shao's cold and strict tone. A scion must set a good example. Of course. Zedai Tafner nodded with modest sincerity. Then, he turned towards Cohen. The latter was trembling because he was frightened by Shao's stern face. Since there is a chair, you do not have to sit on the ground. Yes. Cohen listened seriously and solemnly to his instruction. Both Zedai and Cohen continuously nodded with a smile on their faces, and they appeared to be very respectful. What a joke, this was the Tower Master of the Tower of Eradication owner, the Grey Sword Guard. His lightest punishment for his students was a one-handed handstand for 10 hours. And the offense that deserved the lightest punishment was something like, walking with strides that were too big that showed bad deportment. The Grey Sword Guard stared at them coldly. Zedai and Cohen stood ramrod straight. Fortunately, in the end, Shao only snorted and did not say anything else. The two of them secretly let out a breath of relief. Until Shao said the next sentence slowly, I heard that during these past few days, the two of you secretly broke into the truth library, many times. Zedai and Cohen froze in their original positions at the same time. Hear me out, Zedai laughed awkwardly. You were not around, you know, and Cohen found some traces about the disaster swords, so. We are doing this for the Tower of Eradication and for the purgers. Cohen used the diction he had learned from the police station and patted his chest in a righteous and rigorous manner. We are doing this for the disaster sword. But Shao's serious and deep voice slowly rose and interrupted them. Very good. The Grey Sword Guard looked serious. Cohen Carabayan. Cohen immediately straightened solemnly, his chest sticking out and his head raised. Make a trip to Exton immediately, Shao said unhurriedly. There is an old friend named Caslin who requires some help. Caslin. It was Zedai who spoke up. He stared at Shao in astonishment. Do you mean that Northland drunkard who used his sword like an axe? Shao turned to him. His chilly gaze forced Zedai to stay quiet. But, Cohen rubbed his head awkwardly. I have to go back to Constellation to help my friend first. Do you remember Croche? She was in the same year as you, Shao said in a deep voice. She was hurt by the disaster sword. There is a huge possibility that she might never be able to use a sword for the rest of her life. Cohen lifted his head with a stupefied expression. Croche. An image appeared in his mind of a Northland girl with a buzz cut, holding her sword while clenching her teeth under a scorching sun. And her mouth filled with white teeth. All right, the police turned around without hesitation when he resolutely said to the two scions, I will prepare immediately. How serious is the situation? Do I need to bring my family's private army with me? Bringing a Constellation noble's private army into Exton, Zedai said sternly, is there something wrong with your brain? Cohen nodded in a daze. In a deep voice, Shao said, you are not the only one, there will be a person who will meet with you on the way there, she just recently joined the purgers. Cohen was at once mystified. Ellipsis. Broken Dragon Fortress, the northern portcullis. Be careful on your journey. Even though Lampad has withdrawn his army, and war has not erupted, it is still Exton, after all. The fortress flower, Sonia Caesar, looked at the fully equipped Miranda Arund and chuckled. Even though I really want to recommend for you to bring along the private army of the Arun family. This is the border between the two countries, Miranda said softly, it is impossible to bring troops across it. Not to mention, Arun. Miranda squeezed her black gloves, and at the same time, clenched tightly on the white eagle symbol on her sleeve. The fortress flower saw her subordinates look inside. It is also a good thing to hide away for some time. After all, your uncles and brothers from the Arun family are really annoying. Miranda bit her lip and said nothing. I am not doing this to hide, she said faintly. Sonia held her subordinate's shoulders helplessly. All right, you are doing this to help a friend, right? Miranda patted the white sword hilt at her waist lightly and nodded. Croche, that girl who would never give up. We studied under the same teacher, the daughter of Duke Arun said quietly. When times are difficult for her, I must be by her side. I already have very few things left in the world. I have to treasure them properly. Miranda recalled from her memory that brisk and bright figure dressed in white with his endlessly happy and optimistic tone. Her lips curved up into a smile involuntarily. She turned around and stepped on the stirrup. Do not be worried, commanding officer, I am not some helpless kitten. Also, I am not fighting alone. An old friend will go with me. I will return once the matter is resolved. Miranda Arun sat astride on the horse and nodded to Sonia. She swung her steed and rode it out through the fortress, portcullis. Sonia watched Miranda's disappearing figure, and the faintly discernible white eagle symbol on her back. She then sighed, are you really not doing this to hide? Chapter 114 The People in Hell 1. Somewhere in Eternal Star City. It was in great pain. The air was cold as well as humid, and its skin had become wrinkled because of this. Its 6 limbs had no strength within them, its stomach had become shriveled, its lips trembled and its teeth were no longer as sharp as before. Only the darkness around it made it feel at peace. It lifted its right hand and wanted to change its posture to lie down, but it accidentally knocked against the metal cage. Intense pain shot up its entire body from the part where its skin touched the metal. It opened its mouth and let out meaningless screams of pain. This damned cage. The magic seals on it were concise, meticulous, thorough, perfect, and had no flaws. They were standard products of the Alchemy Tower. It wondered whether the seals were produced by the Confinement Research Center, or the Hex Experimentation Center. It was probably the former. In the already destroyed Alchemy Tower, only that research group, which had been on the decline for a long time, could create this magic cage. It only had one single function. Keeping it firmly locked inside. It had gone through days like this for an unknown number of years now. It had lost its perception of time, and suspected that someday, it would even forget its own name. Every month, it would be fed once, every month, it would be delivered a set amount of electrical shocks, and it had a task it had to complete at all times. In such a situation, it started to miss its primary body. Up until this point, it could still remember the pain of being cut off from its primary body. The cries of grief and screams of pain the primary body felt were fresh in its memory. Even the numerous days of suffering it had to bear and the time it was cut open was nothing compared to the intense pain it suffered when it was separated from its primary body. It really wanted to return to its primary body. If I remember it correctly, my primary body should be locked in the capital of Triumph, that damn capital of the Empire, which belongs to the humans. That land was divided a long time ago and only a small part of its territory is left. It's stupidly weak, but those humans still shamelessly call it the Empire. Weaklings should die, isn't that the law of nature? When it pondered about this, a thought suddenly appeared in its slightly muddled mind, a result of being locked up for too long. That's right, hasn't it been quite some time since my primary body sent anything from the capital of Triumph? Whether it's letters or items, there hasn't been anything. It's been some time since the connection binding me to my primary body's mind was cut, hasn't it? Do the humans not need me anymore? Impossible. It did not believe that the accursed humans would let it or its primary body have a holiday. They would only endlessly use it and drain it of its value, because they did not know their limits. Could it be that something happened to my primary body? This thought appeared in its heart. No, the primary body may also be imprisoned, but at least it's preserved completely in the capital of Triumph. The Empire clearly knows of our value. That prince from the Empire even tried communicating with my primary body before, but how would the prideful primary body possibly answer to these inferior humans' requests to make a deal? That's why they still need me to send messages. The Empire may not be as strong as before, but those humans will definitely protect my primary body. As long as the capital of Triumph isn't destroyed, my primary body will be safe and unharmed. One day, I will definitely return to my primary body, and when I do, I will become strong again, just like before. Then, I will hide myself carefully and become even stronger. But most importantly, I have to find a method to suppress those mystics. It did not want to experience the humiliation of being captured, imprisoned and enslaved again. Especially by that damn mystic. Giza Streelman. If the human nearest to the cage had not mentioned that name, it would have nearly forgotten about it. It gritted its teeth with hate. Before the mystic, it felt as though its flesh and blood were boiling. It felt like it was about to explode. That feeling of prostrating on the ground while screaming in pain was something it would never forget in its entire life. At that moment, the familiar feeling of swelling appeared in its stomach. It's here, it thought. The humiliating feeling of being forced to work as a slave and ordered around by others rose in its heart once again. It did not know which branch was sending news this time. The bell at the top of the metal cage let out furious chimes right on time. Creak, asterisk. The door to the metal cage swung open. It used every ounce of its strength to roar at the cage, trying to show its hate and malice. The intense pain like that of being stabbed by needles, surged up its body once again. It knew that it had to complete its task of getting out of the cage, or else the pain would only get worse. Just like every single time in the past, it climbed out of the cage with great difficulty and reluctance. The pain then slowly diminished. Its stomach squirmed as something inside shot up its throat and reached its mouth. That feeling of its stomach swelling gradually disappeared. It opened its mouth, which was filled with sharp teeth, and spat out a piece of paper in the darkness. Paper again, it thought, feeling annoyed. Those stupid humans, can't they send something more interesting next time? A young man in white robes seized the paper and pulled it out of its mouth in a rough manner. Insolent human. It felt intense pain again and it howled in agony. It knew that it was time to return to the cage. With humiliation and pain filling its heart, it climbed into the cage once more. The pain disappeared. The young man lit up his lamp, and the piercing light from the lamp shone so brightly that it made it bare its teeth and snarl. It lifted its claws to block the 8 pairs of eyes that were closely woven together on its body. Light. The thing it hated the most. Fortunately, once the young man finished reading the paper, the first thing he did was extinguish the light. The latest news from the fortress. In the dark, the young man in white robes put down the paper in his hands within its field of vision. The man then spoke in a voice much more solemn than before. Things have slightly exceeded our expectations. Oh, an old, hoarse voice rang in the air. It remembered this voice. Ever since it was brought out of the capital of Triumph, plenty of humans had been responsible of managing its cage, but the owner of that old voice seemed to have taken care of the cage for a longer period of time. First of all, the prince had his path blocked, and he was subsequently attacked by Lampod when he was at the border, but it seems like no harm has come to him even though the situation was dangerous. Now, the diplomat group is heading to Dragon Cloud City with Lampard's protection. You know I'm not worried about that, the old, hoarse voice said flatly. What about that homicidal maniac? Giza Streelman did not go along with our plan. She headed off to corner Ramon with the Blood Bottle Gang even though we've hinted at them countless times through various communication channels about Raymond's importance to the Brotherhood, the young man said quietly. Giza Streelman. The nerves in its entire body were once again stimulated by that familiar name. Its enemy, the Mystic. She was the enemy of its life, the enemy who moved freely among flesh and blood. What happened? The old, hoarse voice was heard once again. It showed itself in public. Based on our informants in Broken Dragon Fortress, Giza seemed to have threatened Prince Thales' safety when he was on his way to the fortress, said the young man. The sound of a staff striking the ground rose in the dark. The old man asked, puzzled. Based on the information we obtained previously, wasn't the Night Queen the one who intercepted the prince? That was why he went to Broken Dragon Fortress to ask for help, no? Yes, but there have been some new updates. Seems like things turned out a little complicated. The young man raised his head to reveal a smile that no one could see clearly due to the dark. The Blood Mystic appeared for something in the Blood Clan's possession. What do you call it? The Dark Knight Black Coffin. It opened its eyes swiftly. Over the many years it was cut off from its primary body, it may have lived through most of it with a muddled mind and numb senses, but memories of when it was with its primary body still remained in its mind. Dark Knight. What a familiar term. Where did I hear that before? Silence. The old, hoarse voice did not speak. The young man in white robes raised his brows. I remember this thing being in the list of legendary anti-mystic equipment, but based on your reaction, that seems like something very extraordinary, am I right? You know, if we send word now and organize our forces, we might be able to intercept the Night Queen. The air in that dark atmosphere appeared to freeze in an instant. After a long while, the hoarse voice rose into the air slowly. Don't ask, that coffin is something we cannot touch regardless of whether it's the coffin itself or the thing inside the coffin. The young man frowned and wore a puzzled expression. But in the end, he still nodded. Giza was forced to retreat by the fortress flower using the supreme shield. She did not appear again after that, but Ramon was still led to exit in accordance to our original plan. The old figure stood up slowly. Very well, if the Blood Bottle Gang still can't find Ramon, we'll give them another tip. No matter what, we have to lure the Blood Mystic to him. Honestly, that's what I was just about to say, the young voice interrupted him. Your final test appeared to be effective. Morat Hansen, the owner of the old voice and the Black Prophet, slowly lifted his head in the darkness. Despite being under our constant monitoring, The Brotherhood's headquarters has yet to do anything, but the Black Sword has appeared at the borders of the two countries. The young man's lips curled up. I think he's there to save Ramon. Looks like there's something wrong indeed with Ramon, and his value in the Brotherhood may far surpass what we've imagined. There was another round of strange silence. It lasted until Morat started cackling slowly in a dark and shrill voice. He, the Black Prophet laughed. Hey, I almost thought my student and that old woman were working together to deceive me. There was one moment where I really wanted to get rid of my suspicions about Raymond's identity and clear his name from the blacklist. But, no matter how meticulous the disguise is, it won't surpass that skepticism of yours. It's even sturdier than Broken Dragon Fortress. Teacher, Raphael Lindbergh raised his head in the dark and said with a light chuckle. It sounded as if he was mocking Morat. Spread the news. Morat was unbothered by Raphael's mockery. The smile disappeared from his face and he said in a low tone, the prince should be in Exeter now, right? Raphael nodded. They're on the last stretch of land in the Black Sand region. Have Cora come back? The Black Prophet nodded and took a deep breath. Since he's already completed his task and successfully lured Ramon into the prince's diplomat group. Raphael twisted and rubbed the paper against his hands until it was ripped to shreds. He then scattered it gently on a strange picture on the ground. The torn paper started burning in a strange manner once it touched the picture, and then it just disappeared. Should we move on to the next phase of the plan? The young man asked faintly. Yes, it's time we give Secret Room and the Brotherhood a big gift. The Black Prophet stopped moving his staff. Prepare to head off. This is the first big test for you before you take over as the head of the Secret Intelligence Department. Make sure that Black Sword and Giza enter Dragon Cloud City at the same time and discover Ramon. Raphael smiled brilliantly. A fight between the Black Sword and the Blood Mystic, it will definitely be a huge spectacle. Morat took a deep breath and sat down again. It's a scene that makes me so excited. That's why you're in charge of drawing away two of the legendary anti-mystic equipment in Dragon Cloud City. Raphael smirked. A mystic with nothing to fear in another country's capital. Whether or not the situation will turn out to be a grand spectacle is secondary at this point, but it'll still be a very hideous sight to watch. Are you sure you want to do this? Especially, since that's the infamous homicidal maniac under all the intelligence agencies' radar. Raphael was smiling as he thought about it quietly in his heart. Treat it as a return gift from Constellation to Extit. We're taking revenge for all the losses His Majesty and I had to suffer over the past few months, the Black Prophet said with a sigh filled with emotions. After all, this is for the sake of dealing more effectively with the threat brought on by the Blood Mystic. I truly want to see how that old woman in Dragon Cloud City will deal with this situation. Also, Morat thought quietly in his heart, under the tacit consent of Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Department, Blackstreet Brotherhood has enjoyed a period of glory for far too many years. Since the Blood Bottle Gang has been struck with such a devastating blow that Asda as well as Giza were forced to show up. It's time for the Brotherhood as well as their supporters behind them to pay a little price for this. This is all for Constellation's safety, isn't it? Chapter 115 The People in Hell 2. Eternal Star City, Blackstreet. You said that toy is useful. Bullshit legendary anti-mystic equipment. We did so many things and searched for so many years. One of the 6 powerhouses of the Blackstreet Brotherhood, Anton the Ripper, angrily lifted, sleepless eye, Lance off the ground by grabbing his collar and pressing him against the wall, and now. Black Sword used it to poke countless holes in the Blood Mystic's body. It's completely useless. Your goal is to kill Black Sword, am I right? Calm down, Anton. Another one of the 6 powerhouses, Morris, was drenched in sweat when he grabbed Anton's hand. We received the message from the North's messenger Crow together. Even though he was seriously wounded and we don't know if he's dead or alive, Black Sword managed to escape, did he not? Even if the equipment is useless, but, at least Black Sword might still be alive. Might be alive. Anton still firmly pinned Lance against the wall. He rounded on Morris furiously while he pointed at Lance, so you can just forgive this fellow. Even if he used fake equipment to set up Black Sword, even if, under his instructions, our investments through all these years have no returns at all. Morris was speechless for a while. Lance abruptly grabbed Anton's bandage-wrapped arms. Even though Ramon isn't here, and I can't be certain, but it may not be the equipment's problem. After all, we don't even fully understand the name and its function. Lance clenched his teeth and stared right into Anton's furious eyes. In the Secret Intelligence Department, I've read the related files. The Blood Mystic is a more unique entity. It cannot be directly sealed by the average legendary anti-mystic equipment, but this does not mean that. Enough with your files. I will not believe another word of the information from the Secret Intelligence Department anymore. Did you not see the message? Anton yelled agitatedly. That supposedly legendary anti-mystic equipment that you said is able to seal a mystic is ineffective. Just 2 days ago, the Black Sword almost died at the Blood Mystic's hand. Maybe that equipment itself is the thing that lured us in, taking the bait. Impossible. Lance glared fiercely at Anton while he said sternly, that information was related to the lady whom even Morat was extremely afraid of. The strength of Anton's hands intensified more and more. He interrupted Lance fiercely, FCK Morat Hansen. FCK, the Kingdom's Secret Intelligence Department. Don't forget who caused us to be in such a state, who turned us into who we are now. We became a Black Street Brotherhood who threw away our morality for revenge, who did all sorts of evil deeds and things that went against our conscience. We became the Kingdom's maggots who can only gasp for our last breaths in the shadows. Anton's eyes were rimming with redness when he said through clenched teeth, especially you, Cobra and Lance. Were you not the mole Morat planted among us that year? Black Sword has forgiven you, but I have not. While holding Anton back, Morris trembled suddenly. Mole. Haha, you only began to dwell on this matter after 12 years. Lance laughed coldly with difficulty, not caring that Anton's grip was hurting him. Then what has the past 12 years meant to you? Do you think we established the Brotherhood just for fun? The past 12 years, fun. Anton looked as if he'd just been triggered in the worst manner. The veins on his face bulged out and he flew into a rage as he roared frantically, son of a bitch. Do you think that I'm looking after a gang of scum like thieves, bandits and rapists willingly? And to work with lunatics like Shonda Rhoda and Lazens Fisher, smuggling and murdering every day? Lance's expression changed suddenly, his brows moved constantly with his emotions, while he involuntarily clenched his teeth tightly. What kind of life have we lived for the past 12 years? Anton continued to say through his clenched teeth. How much have we done for the useless information you've given us? Then just kill me right here. Use my head to comfort the dead and report to that very important person of yours. Lance yelled violently, interrupting Anton. Treat me as your greatest enemy, and when you take your revenge and your hearts are at peace, you can go back to being decent human beings. Enough. A louder roar bellowed from one side. Anton and Lance were jolted at the same time. Both of them turned to look at Morris who stood at the side. Lake Malone, Capra Gladly, Delcodo Ellsworth. Morris was shaking as he spoke. He bowed his head low, clenched his fists tightly, and shouted each and every name from his mouth. Culdemo Fenway. Justice Desmond. And that important person. Both Anton and Lance jolted. Morris raised his head, the rim of his eyes had reddened unknowingly. Do you still remember them? Do you still remember these names? We swore together that year, to find all the true perpetrators, to avenge those who have died at all costs. Do you think that you are the only ones who are secretly enduring the pain, Skinny? Morris yelled. Over the past 10-odd years, we, who knew nothing about gangs and organizations, fought tooth and nail for our territory, built our own forces of power, extended our influence to the underworld, brought all possible people to our side, fought against Blood Bottle Gang, hid from the pursuit of the Secret Intelligence Department, treated all suspicious people as our enemies, chased after the Charltons and the Shadow Shield, and investigated the truth during that year. Was it not for that one goal? Bam! Asterisk. Morris punched the wall with all the strength in his fist. His lips trembled as he spoke. I have never killed children before, but during these past 12 years, a total of 154 children from 4 to 12 years old have died in the abandoned house in itself. I haven't even included the vast number of child beggars who died 2 months ago because of those accursed rotas. All of this is blood on my hands. I personally buried all of them. I can practically remember all their faces. The latest one was from a year ago. One boy who escaped. For the sake of looking tough and heartless in front of our rival negotiators, I used my psionic ability to choke him to death. Morris's mood grew more distressed and his psionic ability became a bit erratic. Even the surrounding air felt shaky. God knows what we have paid in these past 10-odd years, what we have become. Anton closed his eyes, bit down on his lower lip tightly, and lowered his head. Lance suddenly burst into laughter. That's right. Well said. The sleepless eye showed an expression that looked like a variant between crying and laughing. Ha ha ha. Anton Lewandowski, you thought we did all of that for the sake of correcting, atoning, and repaying for our sins of those years, to make a better world. Dream on. With a formidable gaze, Lance scolded harshly. Just take a look at what we've done through all these years. The Western Desert's prison of bones, that is where we belong. But why are we here? Why have we not accepted our rightful punishments yet? Lance pushed Anton away abruptly, shouting angrily, that's because that day 12 years ago, from the moment when we reached Renaissance Palace's gate, we had already become a group of specters, phantoms, just dead bodies that still breathed. The one and only, supreme, and incomparable goal that exists for us is to drag out all our enemies and manipulators, then burn to ashes with them. Only Black Sword understands this the clearest. We were already in hell. The sealed, soundproofed room suddenly fell into silence. Thud, asterisk. Anton had kicked the wall fiercely and then walked towards the table. He yanked a chair out and sat down heavily. Morris covered his face with his hand. The fist that pressed against the wall was already bleeding. Lance stared intently at the ground, his gaze unmoving. In the silence, there was only the sound of the three men's depressed, shuddering, and rapid breathing. Until Morris broke the silence first. We must believe in Black Sword. The fat man tried his best to collect his emotions when he slowly said, even if there is no legendary anti-mystic equipment, he also has the ability to escape from mystics, just like that year when he confronted Asda. Lance pulled back his scarlet cloak once again. The chief of intelligence from the Brotherhood whom had hailed from the kingdom's secret intelligence department said in a low tone, wait for his news. When he has recovered, I want to have the Black Sword test out that equipment again. How can he test it? Anton still had not adjusted his emotions. He furrowed his brows and said bluntly, gamble with his life again. If he encounters the Blood Mystic again, it could be the time of Black Sword's death. No, I will warn him to stay as far away as possible from the Blood Mystic before we can be sure of the equipment's usability. Lance replied monotonously. Usability, how do we confirm this? Morris wiped away the glistening droplet from his eyes. Do you still remember GU? Lance asked quietly, the Far Easterner. GU, Anton frowned, the boy who joined us before the mercenary group disbanded. The boy who was expelled from Main Ed Knox's Raven Guards. That's him, Lance slowly said, he is currently in Exted and he brought me some information. Morris bandaged his fist and asked in confusion, you still stayed in contact with him? GU is not in the same gang as us. You said it before, that fellow has his own motives, and he's very suspicious. We are significantly lacking in spies to the north, so we have no choice but to borrow some of the local connections. Lance shook his head. As for GU, regardless of whether he's suspicious or not, he seems to be doing very well in that place. Wait, you said you want to confirm the function of that equipment first, so, Morris was dumbstruck when he stared at Lance. Correct, GU had found an old friend in Exted these past few days. Lance lifted his head, his gaze sharp. Indeed, an old friend. Anton and Morris looked at each other in astonishment. Chapter 116 The Three Great Magic Towers in Operation World Cleansing. As the diplomat group traveled further north, the weather became increasingly colder. Snow often floated down the sky, and the amount was increasing gradually, even covering most of their field of vision. If it was not for the cold resistance trees planted on both sides of the road, then even the best scouts would be lost halfway. It was said that this was the prelude to the day before the bitter cold winter. Thales tightened the cloak he had put on a day ago and covered his face tightly. Then he asked Ramon, that's why you don't know how many types of magic there are and what sort of characteristics they have. They had set up camp and were resting again. They were currently located at the juncture between Exted's Prestige Orchid region and Reformation Tower. They traveled through the hills for a short distance from Raymond Pass, and once they passed the area where the Archduke of Reformation Tower governed, they moved along the path in the hills and began heading northwest. Soon, the diplomat group and the Black Sand region's army escorts would enter the Archduke of Prestige Orchid's area of governance. Once they passed Prestige Orchid region, Nuven the Seventh's territory, Dragon Cloud City, the area directly under his command, would be right in front of their eyes. You should say that I don't possess the complete view on magic. Ramon shook his head. It's said that there are plenty of strange and bizarre schools of thought, and categories for magic. There would always be eccentric geniuses who would create new schools of thought or research fields based on the knowledge they possess. Ramon sat beside the fire and explained to Thales, who was beside him, but besides these strange people who always like being alone, most of the other wizards have their own places they clearly belong to. A place they belong to. Thales' eyes lit up. Are you saying? During ancient times, these were places where wizards gathered, and these were the magic organizations they belonged to. Raymond's eyes shone brilliantly. The three great magic towers. Magic towers. Thales turned his head around swiftly. The brief descriptions of these towers he had obtained as he investigated the origins of mystics in Mindy's Hall rushed to his mind again. I have heard some related information about them before. Thales' eyes lit up. So, the wizards of ancient times gathered in these three magic towers to do their research. The three great magic towers are not just three towers, and they were not located in just three spots, Ramon muttered. Wizards are not just tower-dwelling eccentrics either. It's said that the three great magic towers symbolize the three types of attitudes and values among wizards. What attitudes? Thales questioned curiously. Are you saying the attitudes the wizards possess when it comes to knowledge? Ramon shook his head. I don't know. Information about wizards are very hard to come by. Thales sighed. All right, then, what are the three great magic towers? Don't tell me you don't know about those as well. Ramon nodded and smiled. I do know about this clearly, at least. He snuck glances around the area and saw Ida dozing off by the fire, Futre and Kenvida arguing about something in the distance, Wya still trying his best to communicate with Ralph but failing in the end, Tolja leading the scouts to investigate their path ahead and who had not returned yet, and also at the Exted soldiers around them, who seemed to have grown used to them. When he saw that the distance between them was huge and their attentions were far from Thales and Ramon cautiously approached Thales. Situating himself in an angle so that no one else but the two of them could see his actions, he extended his finger towards the snow-covered ground. First, the ascetic tower. Ramon gently drew a square that was turned 45 degrees and had one corner facing downwards. Then, drawing two diagonal lines in the square from corner to corner, he drew a cross in that square. Based on the only remaining information I read, they are the oldest wizard group. In fact, ascetic tower has existed during the uncivilized period and before the holiness exorcism campaign, but they are also the most mysterious. I don't know what they do either. I didn't manage to obtain a lot of their information. Thales frowned. Next is the alchemy tower. Ramon drew a circle. Then on both sides of the circle, he drew 2 triangles with the points each facing outwards. The base of the triangles were arced and they ran parallel to the circle's arc. Ramon then drew another, smaller circle at the center of the circle. Thales recognized it. This picture resembled an eye. Ramon continued speaking, just like its name. It is said that Alchemy Tower provided important assistance during the war where the humans won against the orcs. Their creations are all for warfare or practical uses. Some of their creations have lasted up to today, and are still being used. They are rare and valuable treasures held by the hands of only a few people in the world. The last is the Soul Tower. Ramon drew 2 shapes on the ground. The half-circles of the upper and lower part of these 2 shapes overlapped with each other. This picture was incredibly strange, and the meaning behind it was unclear. There's plenty of strange information about them, there's also all sorts of rumors about them. One moment, it's said that they are the protectors of the mortal world, and in the next moment, it's said that they have an agreement with the Empire. Some say that they are on extremely bad terms with the other 2 magic towers. In fact, some even say that their existence has brought much chaos to the world, and that they are the source of all evil. I don't understand what they're researching on either. It's clear that they are different from the other 2 magic towers. Ramon stared at Thales. Only after the latter had nodded his head to show that he remembered, did the doctor then quickly extend his hand to anxiously erase the 3 pictures, until not a single trace of them was left. That's all I know. As for the other things such as the 3 great magic towers' inheritance, characteristics, history, and origins, I know nothing about them. Information about magic has been completely banned, a bit too thoroughly, in my opinion. Ramon sighed. Also, absolutely do not draw these 3 pictures in front of anyone else. Like Morat, there'll be trouble if you do. Thales raised his brow. Then why were you so at ease when you drew those pictures for me? Am I that trustworthy? Ramon turned his head around to reveal that strange expression on his face again. Trustworthy? Hey, Ramon chuckled lowly, his nose from his movements. I believe that there is a reason behind why you are so interested in magic. That ability of yours that could change the line of fire of those mystic guns. Panic rose in Thales' heart. Damn it, I knew it, he still cares about that a lot. I still think that it isn't a psionic ability. Ramon snickered and said, it should be some type of magic, it's just that I still don't know what type it is. That's why you're so hungry for information about magic, right? Some type of magic, to be precise, Thales said in his heart. Your deductions aren't wrong. Thales stared at Ramon intently. Constellation's new prince and the next king. Not only is he interested in magic, he even has some form of power related to magic. Ramon was beaming. That haggard honor and glory of the past reflecting on his face made Thales sick to his stomach. Just thinking about it makes me excited. Thales heaved a long sigh, then started thinking carefully about the information he had obtained from Ramon over the past few days. Then, the 3 great magic towers no longer exist. The second prince asked quietly. Raymond's smile froze. He clasped his hands together, lowered his head, and hunched his back. That's what is said. The strange doctor brushed some snow off his nose and said with a sigh, do you know about mystics? They are not just slightly stronger warriors that an average person might imagine. In truth. Thales' heart somersaulted thrice in his chest excitedly. Got it. On the surface, the second prince said without batting an eye, as a member of the royal family, I do know a bit about mystics. They are calamities who will never die, and can never be destroyed. Ramon stared at Thales, his gaze filled with a solemn expression. That's right, it's said that the political powers of all countries, the churches of the gods in heaven, and even the devils in hell fear them. They fear that the mystics will make a comeback one day, and launch the second battle of eradication. This is why they want to ban magic. Fear, if that's the case, then aren't the calamities the main reason for the destruction of the 3 great magic towers, and for why the legacy of magic was destroyed? Thales asked dazedly. Ramon straightened his collar, and his expression became incredibly serious. I don't know if the calamities were the ones who destroyed the 3 great magic towers, Ramon replied in a whisper, but I do believe that these so-called calamities and mystics are the products of the magic towers and the wizards after countless research. So, the destruction of the magic towers, the extinction of the wizards, and the loss of magic's legacy is not a coincidence, Thales said in disbelief. Everything related to magic in the world, be it the legacy, knowledge, history, and even wizards themselves, were intentionally banned by the political powers of all human countries. Ramon exhaled deeply. That's right, I think that someone doesn't want to see the birth of a new calamity. Thales frowned deeply. Magic brings a risk that is unmanageable, that's why it's better to put a stop to it and ban all existences of magic. Ramon grunted ambiguously. That's just too stupid. Thales sighed, because they were afraid of possible mystics appearing and were terrified of their power, that's why they banned all magic. That's such a short-sighted and dumb decision. Ramon clenched his fists tightly. Our opinions align in this matter. We need to find a possibility from magic to fight against the mystics and the dangers they pose, now more than ever, isn't that so? The 3 great magic towers might have been destroyed, but their ruins should still exist, right? Thales stroked his chin. Didn't you go there to test your luck? Ruins. Ramon curled up a corner of his lips and said with a sour expression on his face, "This is what frustrates me the most, those damn countries. They've found practically every single bit of information about magic, wizards, and magic towers, and destroyed them utterly and completely. I can't even find the location of the magic tower's ruins." Thales frowned deeply. "Perhaps when I return to the kingdom, I can go check the royal family's records." "Say no more about it, especially your constellation." Ramon let out a cold harumph. "Your ancestor, the founder of the country, the great king of Renaissance, Tormund I, personally gave the order to completely erase all traces related to magic in constellation." Thales was momentarily stunned. In around 600 years ago, the law enforcers in charge of banning magic all came from the newly established kingdom's secret intelligence department. Ramon hissed fiercely. "With great difficulty, I finally found some traces of it in Extit. They called it Operation World Cleansing." Thales looked at the snow-covered ground in a daze and pulled the cloak tighter around himself. "How did they do it?" The prince lifted his head. "If magic is as important in the past as you said, they just did it." Ramon raised his head, his eyes were filled with hate. During the few decades after the Battle of Eradication ended, the countries imprisoned the remaining wizards, expropriated all books, scrolls, records, and items related to magic. In fact, they even investigated all the people who once had close ties to the wizards. The main point is that they erased all traces of magic from history. Of course, once they are discovered, all the people who want to research magic and bring about its revival would immediately turn into a thorn in the side of all countries' governments and the gods, churches, and they would be killed without hesitation. Also, that magic would never appear again. They fell silent. For a time being, only the sounds of fire crackling and the wretched howls of the freezing wind could be heard as they sat beside the fire. If the kingdom's secret intelligence department was the one in charge of Operation World Cleansing 600 years ago, then there might still be plenty of information remaining in the department, Thales said while he mulled over his thoughts. "Good idea," Ramon said mockingly and disdainfully. "You're right, if I want to get something out of the kingdom's secret intelligence department without anyone knowing about it." Thales understood what the doctor meant and sighed. "It'll be even harder than trying to breach Broken Dragon Fortress." Ramon stared coldly at the fire as he finished Thales' sentence. "Wait." Thales thought of a question, and a strange expression appeared on his face. "Doctor," he said slowly, "Morat is not the first chief of the Secret Intelligence Department, am I right?" "Nonsense. The kingdom's Secret Intelligence Department was formed over 600 years ago, when Constellation was formed." Ramon let out a cold snort, then exhaled. "Morat is a human. He's not an immortal or an eternal being. He can't live for that long." Thales rolled his eyes. "It's really pitiful when you don't have enough EQ." Thales said in annoyance, "You didn't understand what I meant. I'm asking who the first chief of the kingdom's secret intelligence department was and who was the person in charge of Operation World Cleansing." Ramon was stunned, then turned his head around to stare at Thales. Thales rubbed his red, cold hands and blew out a puff of misty breath. "This is a clue. No matter how terrifying and mysterious the secret intelligence department is, and no matter how meticulous, efficient, and fastidious they are, as long as they are an organization, they must rely on the actions and mental state of mind of their members, who also happen to be humans. And humans are always complicated." Thales blinked. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" Ramon frowned. "Two. What?" Thales asked, puzzled. Ramon looked around himself cautiously, then turned his head around and said, "Two people. 600 years ago." The strange doctor lowered his voice. "In the year 38 of the calendar of eradication, two people led the kingdom's secret intelligence department and were in charge of the detailed implementation of Operation World Cleansing." "Very good," Thales whispered quietly. "Even if 600 years has passed, we'll still be able to discover their past. Who are these two people?" Ramon chuckled softly and said two names, Leinster Covendier. Thales' expression instantly changed. "Covendier? That's right, he's the first chief of the kingdom's secret intelligence department." Ramon wore an expression as if he knew Thales would react this way and watched Thales' response with a look of interest, then smiled and said, "He is also the first master of the Covendier family, one of the 6 great clans of Constellation. The first Duke of Iris Flowers." Thales widened his eyes. There was a crease between his brows. Ramon gritted his teeth and exhaled before he continued speaking, "And his assistant, Halva Carabaean. The first master of the Carabaean family, one of the 13 distinguished families, the Sword of the Twin Towers. The first Count of Walla Hill, and later on, the kingdom's Minister of Intelligence. Do you still think this path is possible, O honorable prince?" Thales fell completely silent. Ramon did not speak either. Just as Thales was mulling over these two names and the meaning behind them, the Extit sentinels emitted a loud shout that rang through Northland sky that was filled with the rustling, cold wind. "Stay alert." The elite Extit soldiers around them drew their weapons in an instant. Numerous sounds of metal leaving their scabbards rose into the air, and the atmosphere was tense and threatening. The Northlanders' faces were stern, and not a single hint of panic could be found. Compared to the group battle formation Constellation employs, the Northlanders formed groups of 2 and stood next to each other shoulder to shoulder, standing scattered from the other pairs around the perimeter of the camp and blocking the path inside while facing the cold wind and floating snow around them. Find your positions. Where are the scouts and mounted sentinels? Why didn't we receive a warning from them? Light cavaliers, mount your horses, and don't dawdle around. Amid the noise, the light cavaliers mounted their horses under their commander's orders and rushed to the perimeter while the heavy cavalry and heavy infantry started equipping their armors first. Ida instantly rushed to Thales' side. Wya and Ralph followed suit. Stay on alert, the elf guard of unknown age said solemnly. How unfortunate, it's another army. Army, a thought appeared in the second prince's heart. Under the moonlight, the sharp vision he gained after the fluctuations modified his eyes allowed Thales to quickly see the source of the threat clearly. To the north of the camp, in the falling snow that caused their vision to be unclear, countless cavaliers in full armor appeared. Light armor, gray shirts, white horses, masked faces. Quick but silent, they practically melded with the snow around them. In this kind of weather, Poutre rushed to them from behind and frowned. They're elites. Thales sucked in a deep breath. Am I really that unlucky? These cavaliers, who were clearly hostiles at first glance, suddenly spread out when they were 100 meters before them. Then, with disorderly movements, but in an organized fashion, they outflanked Thales' group. Chapter 117 Star Killer. Beside his ears. Unending noises, uproars that filled the air, meaningless roars and shouts erupted from the crowd. Right before his eyes. The man of influence put on a gentle smile, grabbed his shoulders, and leaned against him shudderingly. He extended his head to his ear, and spoke in a low and gentle voice, You did well, do not worry. You did well, do not worry. In the deep darkness, he was jolted awake from his nightmare. The wounds on his body felt as if it had come alive instantly and an unbearable, intense pain erupted from his wounds simultaneously. His expression twisted as he stifled the pained screams, keeping them in his throat. Then, he turned his attention to sense the things around him first. Wind and snow howled past his ears, a foul smell wafted to his nose and mouth, the low growls from livestock a few steps away from him traveled to his ears. He lifted his trembling left hand with great difficulty and was unsurprised when he touched an old bumpy wall that was made of rough bricks. His power of eradication surged up. In the darkness where he could not even see his own fingers, the area around him gradually formed with his senses. This was the place he had escaped to, dragging his severely wounded body after he had finished sending his message to the spies in the Brotherhood. It was an ordinary barn in a Northland village. It had a simple and thick roof made of straw. One of the walls was a crude, handmade fence, the muddy floor was a mixture of water, snow, urine, mud, and his own blood. Safe. The blood mystic was nowhere nearby. Only then did he let out a low, pained moan. He had 2 stab wounds, 6 lacerations, 2 bone fractures, and countless scrapes, contusions, and muscle sprains. And she was a girl with such a nice smile, too. When he thought of the blood mystic, he could only laugh bitterly. Why is she so hot-tempered? I only wanted to use the legendary anti-mystic equipment and make a few holes in your real body. When he thought of this, he touched the 2 weapons beside his hand. Oh, Lance, in his pain, he sighed, I was tricked by you again. Not too far away, 2 large and 6 small thick-furred pigs gathered uneasily together, warming each other up while trying their best to be as far away as possible from this new, unwelcome guest. A black dog bravely stationed itself outside the fence at the perimeter of its territory, emitting low warning growls at him. The snowfall outside gradually stopped. He could now perceive what was happening outside the barn. He sensed another wooden house with a thatch roof. There were 4 sets of breathing belonging to those deep in slumber. 2 of them were rather steady, the other 2 were young and restless. Next to the wooden house was a horse stable. In there were 2 sets of slightly different, heavy breathing. That must be 2 of the strong horses that were unique to Northland. He smiled in the darkness as he recalled the days when he had been rushing around, working hard, and staying in other people's houses in different countries. Clearly, this was an average Northland family of 4. One of the 2 horses should be a workhorse, and the other was a steed that was used for military service and hunting purposes. They must have rented these horses from the suzerain. Judging by the horrid situation around him, those pigs may also not belong to the family, but were kept specifically as livestock to be served on the suzerain's table. How could pigs like these, clearly just dumped in the barn and expected to survive on their own with no more attention paid to them, survive in this sort of weather? This was, after all, not like the South, where there was a very different, meticulous set of methods used to take care of their livestock. A long time ago, that dirty girl had also told him that she wanted to come to the north and see the land in the north. She wanted to see how the Northlanders survived in this cold weather. I wonder if they rear piglets. She blinked, those eyes shining with curiosity and watching him. But at that time, he cared only about dipping his head down and wiping the weapon on his calf. Do the Northlanders rear pigs? I have an answer now. I'll have to remember this, next time, I can tell her. But right now. Then, the man put away the smile on his face. He clenched his teeth while lying on the ground. His power of eradication surged up his body and seeped through every pore of his skin to accelerate closing, recovery, and healing of the wounds all over his body. However, this process was filled with a more terrifying wave of intense pain, and a more unbearable itchiness. It was like the countless times he had struggled with these sensations in the past. But amid the shivers and cold sweat, the man's lips quirked slightly and revealed an anguished smile. It's still okay. At least I don't have to bear with Dr. Raymond's ceaseless chatter and taunts when he healed me. That big-nosed doctor's boring chatter can match up to the destructive power of the mystics. The power of eradication surged in waves to all his injuries, forcing his nerves, his muscles, and his bones to recover, heal, and reassemble themselves swiftly. Surges of stabbing pain caused him to close his eyes tightly as he shivered. His eyelids had practically fused together, and his forehead broke out in cold sweat uncontrollably. A long time passed. In the end, he no longer trembled and laid limply on the ground. He clenched his teeth and let out a long breath. How long has it been since I was this heavily injured? With great effort, he flipped around, and his mouth as well as his nose brushed against the incredibly dirty floor. Incredibly dirty, huh? In the darkness, he began to snicker softly, the incredibly dirty me. Now I have no right to glare at her anymore, right? That dirty girl. The man pushed down on the dirty floor and climbed up weakly, sensing his body's condition. He needed food to replenish his energy, and the best would be meat. He looked at the pigs. The family of thick-furred pigs instinctively sensed the man's killing intent. They quivered and made low grunts. At the same time, the sounds of the 4 sets of breathing from the family of Northlanders in deep slumber traveled to the man's ears again. The pigs must be one of the few sources they had to survive. He sighed. The man looked at the shivering family of thick-furred pigs and put on a smile that they could not see and could not understand. Then, he picked up the 2 weapons beside his hand and climbed out of the barn. He remembered that the day before the bitter cold winter was approaching soon. Thank goodness this is the Northland. Thank you, Master of Mountains. Thank you for your present. And I will remember your kindness. Ellipsis. Hoplites, form the first line of defense on the slope in front. Slow them down no matter what. Kempita watched the attacking cavaliers with a grim expression and sent his orders resolutely. Under his orders, the exted infantry from Black Sand region carried the large metal shields, unique to the Northland, and trotted to the front of the camp to form a line of defense. Heavy infantry, in 1 minute, you must be ready and catch up to the defense line. Doppelsoldners, move to the front, aim for the horses' legs. Heavy armor axemen, stay behind them. As long as they fall from their horses, whether they are moving or not, swing your axe down on them. Phil, Kempita whipped his head around and yelled at the archers to the side of the camp, have your people ready. The enemies appeared too suddenly, there's no time to aim and shoot. Once he had finished speaking, a short exted soldier shouted at the top of his lungs and gave orders to the archers that stood in 2 rows at the side of the camp, knock your arrows, draw your bows and get ready to shoot together. Cavaliers, mount your horses. Find a flank that will give you a chance to attack. Fire the signal arrow. Send the light cavaliers to the back of the camp, have the rearguards provide the reinforcement quickly. Compared to them, the group from Constellation who were under layers of protection by the Black Sand region's army, was much quieter. Weather bad, wind strong, hard to control. This was Ralph's sign language. Unsurprisingly, it caused WYA to frown again. Ramon clenched his teeth and started mumbling endlessly beside his ears, I just knew we're going to war again. Nothing good comes from following you. You're a prince and a block of cheese that specifically attracts flies, and I'm just a normal doctor. He did his best to shrink to the back and move himself away from Thales, but also did not leave the circle of protection provided by the army. The cunning doctor, WYA Casso, watched him with a cold glance as he pushed down on his sword. He gave a snort of displeasure. Thales did not bother with the doctor. His expression was stiff. With complicated emotions, he watched the cavaliers who surrounded them. It was not that he was numb to threats, but ever since he left Eternal Star City and journeyed north, he had encountered far too many mind-boggling threats, so much so that when he ran into a similar situation, his first reaction was no longer surprise or nervousness. Instead, he let out a long sigh. What is it this time? Can't they just let me get to Dragon Cloud City safely? But, Thales forced himself to think of something that is logical. Black Sand region has an army of more than 2,000 soldiers. Patrols were done very cautiously all along the way. We were careful when we pushed our journey onwards. Why were we completely unaware of these unexpected guests? Poutre said that these people are elites, but the guards around me are also powerful warriors and elite soldiers from Black Sand region. I shouldn't be too worried, maybe. They continued to stay on guard until a familiar voice traveled from afar, from among the masked light cavalry in gray. Soldiers, drop your guard. It was Tolja. Thales sighed in relief. Lord Tolja, Black Sand region's Fire Knight, one of Extit's 5 war generals, and whom had gone to scout ahead, appeared from among the cavaliers across from them. He stopped beside the lit campfire at the outermost area of the camp. These are King Nuvan's personal guards. They are the team sent by His Majesty to receive the Prince of Constellation's diplomat group. Old friend, it's not that I don't believe you, but nowadays, it's never wrong to be more cautious. Viscount Kenvida drew the sword at his waist, and, with a soldier protecting him, walked to the front of the camp. Is there a person from the king who can verify this? There's also the possibility of spies being among the Archduke of Black Sand's subordinates, is that not so? Kenvida pushed the words he did not say to the bottom of his heart. The cavaliers in grey swiftly drew their reins and dismounted at the front of the camp. Thales could not help but notice that their steeds were quiet and steady in the face of the cavaliers' rough manner of halting them. They did not neigh a lot. These cavaliers stood in one line and stood neatly in the direction directly parallel to the camp, showing superior mobility and discipline. Elites, huh? A masked man with brown hair wearing a white cloak rode out from among the cavaliers. Tolja followed behind him and rose into Black Sand Region's camp. Poutre finally saw the elite cavaliers clearly, and the vice diplomat sucked in a deep breath beside Thales. I met these people when I was wandering in the past. Based on their attire, they are indeed the king of Extit's personal guards. Thales swiveled his eyes to watch them, then let out a breath of relief. Thank goodness, they should not be the enemy, for now. By his side, the Tower of Eradication graduate and attendant, WYA, was clearly taken aback. Are you talking about the White Blade Guards? WYA asked in a low voice. The White Blade Guards who are matched in power to the elites of the Constellation royal family's personal guards, and whom were known as the Dragon's Imperial Guards. Poutre nodded. Remember that tavern owner called Castellan from a few days ago? He was once the commander of the White Blade Guards. Thales raised his head in shock and looked at Poutre. The latter shook his head. Why do you think so many retired soldiers gather at his tavern? White Blade Guards, the king's personal guards, the Dragon's Imperial Guards, old man Castellan's old division. Thales tucked the piece of information in his heart and carefully observed how things unfolded. The masked man rode and stopped before Kenvida. He first cast a glance at the Archduke of Black Sand's most trusted advisor, then, with a sharp gaze, he looked towards the group from Constellation. His eyes stopped on their double cross-shaped stars flag for an instant before he averted his gaze from it. As the captain of King Nuven's personal guards, I should be considered a person from the king, correct? The masked, cloaked man pulled down the scarf over his face to reveal a pale face with clear features. There was a weapon with an indistinct shape behind his back. The white hilt stuck out from under the similarly white cloak. Nicholas, it's you. When Kenvida saw his face clearly, his expression turned sour. The cloaked man with the pale face harumphed coldly, nimbly dismounted in front of Kenvida, then he tossed a sealed scroll at Kenvida's bosom. I brought the White Blade Guards to receive Constellation's prince. If you have any questions, take a look at the king's warrant. Kenvida tore the flame-red seal open with a frown. I ran into them when I was scouting ahead, the White Blade Guards, behind the cloaked man. Lord Tolja the Fire Knight quickly dismounted, and with a sullen face, he said, looks like King Nuven has really placed great importance on Constellation's diplomat group. Kenvida finished reading the warrant and sighed. He sheathed his sword and, at the same time, issued an order to the Black Sand Region's army. Stand at ease, let them come in. The masked cavaliers with the grey cloaks, members of the White Blade Guards, rode into their camp haughtily, as if there was no one else besides them in the area. Although their faces were hidden under the scarves, their gazes were sharp and fierce. They glared at each person in the camp, be they Extitians from Black Sand Region, or Constellations at the center of the camp. Mobilizing an army of nearly 2,000 men to protect this prince. The man in the white cloak walked towards Constellation's diplomat group and surveyed the situation around the camp before he harumphed coldly, Lampard is such a generous archduke. When they heard the mocking tone in his words, Kenvida and Tolja frowned. This for his highness' safety, at least until he safely meets King Nuven, Kenvida replied in a level-headed manner, we believe that there are people in Extit who want this prince's life. Based on the information we obtained, the lot of you from Black Sand Region surrounded them and blocked their path in front of the fortress, then used mystic guns to shoot them as well. The man tightened his cloak around himself. That's right, it looks like someone really wants his life. Kenvida was rendered speechless momentarily. We will take over from here, the man with the white cloak said brusquely. As for you lot from Black Sand Region, you have done your duty, return to where you belong. Bringing several thousands of soldiers into another suzerain's territory is not a good idea, especially when the day before the bitter cold winter is about to arrive. Lampard's wild ambitions end here, His Majesty will deal with him later. Tolja replied coldly, the Archduke gave us orders to protect the prince until he reaches Dragon Cloud City. Even if he goes with you willingly, we must follow him to Dragon Cloud City. Do whatever you want. If you want to follow, then go on ahead. The money you spend in moving 2,000 people and their provisions will not come from us anyway. The man tapped the white hilt behind him and said nonchalantly, next time, Tolja, let us spar against each other. Tolja let out a displeased grunt. He instinctively pressed his hand on his saber. 1. The man with the white cloak chuckled softly and continued walking towards Thales. By the order of King Nuven Charlton, the scion of Hero Rikaru, the great common elected king of Extit, while escorted by his subordinates, the man with the white cloak ignored the other people and walked in a straight line towards Thales before he lowered his head to size up the only 7-year-old boy in the camp. He did not spare even the slightest hint of a smile on his pale face. "You are Thales Jadastar." Putre's expression changed. He could sense the hostility in the other person's voice. Thales sensed the cold chill in his eyes, too. A crease slowly appeared between his brows. There's something off about this. But in the end, Thales only smiled and put on a standard smile. Beside him, Putre frowned. He looked towards Tolja, who stood next to him with a sour expression, but refrained from saying anything. Then, Putre cleared his throat and said to the hostile-looking white blade guards, "This is Thales Jadastar, the second prince of Constellation, and under the orders of King Kessel." Putre had yet to finish talking when he was rudely interrupted by the man with the white cloak. "My name is Nicholas, commander of the White Blade Guards." The man named Nicholas shook his head with an expressionless face, then dipped his head down to speak to Thales. "A long time ago, the people always said that the blood of the royal family from the empire came from the gods, which is why their blood is a dazzling gold. When it flows out, it would even shine brightly under the sun. So, is your blood also gold in color? Would it shine?" Nicholas. Putre and Wya seemed to have heard the name before. The attendant and vice diplomat stared at the man in shock. As for Thales, he mulled over Nicholas's words, not completely understanding them. "Golden blood, what the heck is that?" "I would not know." Thales smiled until it reached his eyes. "After all, I do not really bleed." "Do you mean that you, King Nuvan's personal guard, really want to see me bleed?" The second prince retorted without flinching. As if he would. HMPH. Nicholas gave a light snort before his expression became cold again immediately. "I also know of one Jadastar. You are leagues behind him." Putre sucked in a deep breath. Wya silently took one step closer to Thales, clenched his teeth, and glared at Nicholas. Thales turned his head around to see Putre's reaction. His heart was filled with puzzlement and wariness. Who is this man? And Thales pondered over his words, and he was momentarily stunned. Leagues behind him. What does he mean? Jadastar. The second prince frowned. He sized up Nicholas's attire and remembered that this person was the king's personal guard, then asked cautiously, "Pardon me for asking, are you talking about my uncle, Midir Jadastar?" "No, I am talking about the sword of reversing light." Nicholas narrowed his eyes and moved his left hand to tap his right shoulder. His pale face turned even paler. 12 years ago, he cut me on my shoulder, and he nearly sliced off my shoulder blade." Thales' expression changed. Another person who personally experienced the war between Constellation and Extit during the Bloody Year. By the looks, he even suffered quite a bit at Horus Jadastar's hands. The corner of Thales' eyes swept past Kenvida and Tolja, who both stood across from him. His gaze also swept across the Extitians around him. From ambushing the supply line to charging straight to the 3 archdukes of Extit's battle line, to wounding Tolja, to snatching the motionless bow, and in the end, the soldiers under his command had even killed the former Archduke of Black Sand. The enmity Horus and the people of Extit had formed seemed to be a little too rich and colorful. The sword of reversing light, Horus Jadastar. Just how many similar inheritances did this second uncle of his leave in Extit for him? Thales could only give a light cough and maintain his constant smile as he nodded. "It is a real pity." Beside him, Putre furrowed his brows tightly. Thales had also noticed that Tolja let out a light breath of relief behind Nicholas. "No, there is nothing that you should regret," Nicholas said flatly. "After all, I have already gotten even with him." Putre gritted his teeth and sent a sharp glare at the man standing in before him. "This man, he's mentioning this during the first meeting. Is he trying to intimidate us first?" Thales, who was out of the loop, had a thought appear in his head. "Get even?" he asked carefully. "What do you mean?" Putre sighed. It caused Thales to feel an incredibly ominous air loom over his head. "Ah," a terrifying, freezing glare shone in Nicholas's eyes. "I killed him, on the battlefield in Raymond Pass." Thales' expression froze for a moment. "Damn it all," he told himself in his heart. "That is why we got even, Horus and I." A ghost of a smile showed up faintly on Nicholas's pale face. He lifted his right hand and pointed it at his left chest. "Just like this, I stabbed him, twisted the sword, and then dragged it out diagonally. You should have seen his expression before he died." Thales frowned and sized up the commander of White Blade Guards again. "The person who killed Horus, the enemy of the Jadastar royal family. And I proved, in the end." Nicholas narrowed his eyes and sighed lightly. "Even the blood of those in the Jadastar royal family, the royal family of the former empire, their blood is not gold, but when it gushes out." Nicholas licked the corner of his lips in a terrifying manner and put on a chilling smile. He looked down on Thales and said slowly, "It is all red." Thales glared at the pale man with a dark expression on his face. The man's aggressive gaze, which he did not bother to hide, made Thales uncomfortable throughout his entire body. Yet at that moment, as Constellation's prince, the best reaction he could give was to remain expressionless. "Allow me to introduce you to each other, Constellation's prince and everyone else." Viscount Kentvita let out a long sigh and shook his head slightly before he took a step forward. This is Lord Sore Nicholas, one of the famous 5 war generals of Extit. The people know of him as. Kentvita saw the dark expressions on the faces of the constellations and raised his brows in resignation before he said, Star Killer. Nicholas watched Thales with burning eyes. Like a hunter sizing up his prey, a slight chill crept into Thales' heart. Star Killer. Let us cut the meaningless small talk, citizens of the Empire, Nicholas said slowly, from now on, we will be the ones who will escort you to Dragon Cloud City. Thales was momentarily stunned. Of course, the second prince watched Nicholas and, with mixed feelings in his heart, he nodded slightly, if this is what King Nuvan wants. However, he was feeling incredibly anxious. King Nuvan actually sent someone like this to receive him. Thales suddenly had an ominous feeling about his future days in Dragon Cloud City. Wait, based on rules and protocol, Poutre took a step forward in a solemn manner. The diplomats on our side must officially speak to someone of equal status among those welcoming us from Extit. You talk too much, Nicholas cut off the vice diplomat's words brusquely, I have no time to waste. In the next moment, Thales saw Nicholas's expression become serious, and the cloak behind him fluttered. Please believe me, this is for your safety, your highness, said Sore Nicholas, the Star Killer. This pale man let out a cold snort with a cold smile. He gestured at Thales with his chin as his expression changed, and he gave an order to the white blade guards behind him. Tie him up. What? Thales widened his eyes. Translator's note. One Ma Dao and Pei Jian are both sabers. Just one is used by cavaliers, the other one by foot soldiers. Chapter 118 The Unexpected Guests. Before Thales realized it, the attendant and protector behind him took a step forward without hesitation and firmly used their bodies to shield him. Then, a chafing sound of people removing their swords from their sheaths rose into the air continuously. Clang, asterisk. Wya pulled out his sharp blade from the sheath without any hesitation. He vaguely aimed the tip of the blade at Nicholas's throat with a serious gaze in his eyes. Swish, asterisk. Ralph had also sprung his only hidden blade from his sleeve and aimed the sword's blade at Nicholas's heart. The upper half of his face that was not covered by the silver mask revealed his sour expression. Cling, clang, cling, asterisk. Noises were made by the white blade guards behind Nicholas. These tall and robust, masked Northland elites each had a light arm shield attached to their left hands, while they pulled out their uniquely shaped battle swords from their waists. The sword hilts were snow-white and slender, and could be grasped with both hands, but the blades glistened brightly in an elegant arc. It did not truly seem like the crude and forceful Northland style. Their sword unsheathing movements were orderly and filled with a solemn air. Their unmasked eyes looked murderous. It was unknown as to when they had dispersed into a half-circle, and had the Constellation's diplomat group loosely encircled from 3 sides. The dozen soldiers left that were from Constellation, such as Gennard, Willow, and others, drew their weapons without hesitation and supported the first line of defense going up against the white blade guards. Ida's voice came from behind Thales' ears. See their movements and gazes, these are real elites. Our royal family guards are nothing compared to them. They are even better than the Black Sand region army. Even if they confront the vampire's Sacred Blood army, they might probably not be inferior in any respect. Thales stared at Nicholas, standing across him, and the ice-cold smile on his face in disbelief. What is going on? Are they going to tie me up to get to Dragon Cloud City? It was not that he had never expected the possibility of this encounter in Extit. In fact, it was extremely normal for King Nuvan, who had suffered the painful loss of his beloved son, to be angry and wish to ridicule, mock or even humiliate him, even if the Jadestar royal family and Walton family actually had the same interest in avoiding war between the two countries, and also had the same wish in putting a stop to Black Sand region's wild ambitions. But Thales had never thought that this humiliating way of welcoming him would start before he even reached Dragon Cloud City. Do I really have to let them tie me up when we go to Dragon Cloud City? Under the moonlight, Thales felt his skin crawl when he stared at the white blade guards' battle swords with white hilts that glinted in the cold light while running a rough estimation of the disparity of power between both parties. If we refuse, how will the situation develop? This is ridiculous, came Poutre's stern and furious voice. He hurriedly pondered the circumstances before his eyes and said exasperatedly, Bind. There has never been a diplomat who encountered this type of treatment when they are sent on a diplomatic mission to another country. By doing so, you are blatantly besmirching King Nuvan VII's reputation and Extit's glory. It will not bring about any honor and glory to your king. If he was King Nuvan's subject, he must have some misgivings about the prestige and dignity of the common elected king of Extit, unless. Around them, the Extitians who originated from Black Sand region were staring at the situation with confused expressions on their faces. The dozens of white blade guards and the dozen-something constellations aimed their weapons at the enemy while they confronted each other with mutual hostility. HMPH, Nicholas curved up one corner of his mouth to reveal an ominous, cold smirk. This will indeed not bring any honor or glory to the king, but it will make him happy and temporarily relieve his sorrows, that would be enough. Poutre gripped the longsword in his hand tightly whereas Thales furrowed his brows involuntarily. The next moment, without a command or an order, the masked soldiers of the White Blade Guard took a uniform step forward while a cold glare shone in their eyes. Thud, asterisk. With heavy steps, they stomped on the snowy ground, and it sounded as if they were using a hammer and striking the hearts of constellations. Willow Ken stared at his enemy tensely. His shoulders trembled and he was about to strike with his twin pikes. Slap, asterisk. A strong hand reached out from the side and held the young pikeman's right hand tightly to hold back the spear tip that he almost poked out. Willow jumped in fright. He turned around and found that it was the veteran, Gennard. Steady, ignore their footsteps, pay attention to their shoulders, he said calmly. After experiencing the severe, bloody war with the Blood Clan in the Birch Forest, many of the private soldiers died or were injured terribly. The head of the private army, Cora, was seriously injured, so he stayed back in the fortress, and the Duke's former personal guard and veteran, Gennard, indistinctly became the temporary team leader of this group, consisting of some of the Jadestar private army, the fortress, veterans, and the recruits from the Northern Territory, by relying on his vast experience from the battlefield and all his mastered skills, which he gradually regained his proficiency for. However, in the face of such an incomparably intense atmosphere, the veteran could not help breaking into a cold sweat. Thales tried his best to say calmly, "Is this the will and order of King Nuvan?" Nicholas ignored the two sword blades aimed at his throat and his heart. He said darkly, "Oh, of course. He just has not said it yet." After a second, Nicholas moved and he took a sudden step towards Thales. The boy became startled. Both Wya and Ralph clenched their teeth and thrust their weapons forward, trying to force Nicholas to retreat. But then, a cold light flashed across Nicholas's face and his figure disappeared in a flash. In an instant, the pale-looking Star Killer turned his body sideways and moved into the gap between the two swords. Asterisk shing, asterisk. Wya's single-edged sword that slashed at his throat hit against the white sword hilt that Nicholas had extended out from behind his shoulder. Sparkles flew from the impact. Clang, asterisk. As for Nicholas's right hand, he flicked his fingers easily on the hidden blade that Ralph had used to point at Nicholas's heart. In that instant, under Wya and Ralph's indignant gazes, Nicholas broke through their defenses without even the slightest change in his expression. He squeezed further into the gap between Wya and Ralph and extended his left hand towards Thales. Damn it! Thales clenched his teeth and reacted extremely quickly by taking a step backwards, avoiding Nicholas's hand. At the same time, he raised his left hand in the air while his right hand reached for the dagger at his waist, and shifted into the stance of the Northland military sword styles, iron body, style. But to his surprise, he saw Nicholas's hand changing direction at the same time he retreated, changing his hand's trajectory to the direction Thales moved, as if he had predicted his movements. The fluctuation rushed up to Thales' brain just in time and slowed the situation before his eyes to its maximum degree. In Thales' vision, Nicholas moved very slowly. He was like a flashing silver light, but each time the light sparkled in his body, it caused Nicholas's figure to transform. This is his power of eradication. Thales had a tense expression on his face as he carefully pondered. The Star Killer's figure, movements, speed, transformations and movements all entered Thales' consciousness in that instant. After a moment of estimation, a pessimistic conclusion came to Thales' mind. No matter how I evade, I cannot avoid Nicholas's capture. Fortunately, I still have her. Thales felt the changes in the cloaked figure's presence behind him. Slap, asterisk. Nicholas's hands had only extended halfway when a cloaked, petite figure grabbed him by the wrist. Ida tightly grasped Nicholas's wrist and coldly spoke up, "Be polite, little brat. At least say, how are you, or, please." Thales exhaled deeply. Wya and Ralph swung their swords swiftly towards him, then positioned them firmly on the Star Killer, neck. Nicholas seemed to be slightly surprised, but he still did not care about the two swords pressed against his vitals. Instead, with furrowed brows, he stared at his wrist that was held by Ida, and said to her with a fascinated tone, "Oh. A woman, but you managed to see through my movements." The dozens of White Blade Guards surrounding Nicholas did not seem worried about their leader being caught in a dangerous situation. Their gazes were still ice-cold and murderous while they continued to put pressure on the constellations. Poutre's expression darkened. "What is the meaning of this, Lord Nicholas? This does not conform to the conventions and it is also not an order from King Nuvan. These actions of yours are practically no different from assassination." "Assassination, assassination." Nicholas murmured these words under his breath. He lifted his head, and his expression turned extremely terrifying. "Are you referring to what the constellations did to Prince Maria on your land?" Nicholas glared fiercely at Thales with his rage-filled eyes and enunciated each of his next words slowly and clearly. "Assassination. What you did to the king's only son, to Extit's prince, to Dragon Cloud City's heir, and to my student. That cowardly conduct." Poutre was initially stunned, then immediately came back to his senses and said without hesitation, "King Nuvan should still be the one who decides this." "Damn it." Thales panted lightly and bit down on his lower lip. He clenched his teeth discreetly when he looked at Nicholas, who was being restrained by Ida and who had WYA and Ralph's swords pressed against his throat. How should I handle this situation? Force Nicholas to retreat. Thales sucked in a deep breath, then raised both his hands with his palms turned towards the pale man to indicate that he was just a harmless little boy. However, Nicholas only gave him a malicious, cold sneer as a response. The second Prince of Constellation turned his head around and shouted towards the army of Black Sand region, Viscount Kenvida and Lord Tolja, your mission to escort me to Dragon Cloud City is already almost complete. I believe the people will praise the Archduke of Black Sand's loyalty to King Nuvan, and King Nuvan will also be satisfied with your indomitable fealty. Meanwhile, I am very grateful for your efforts in escorting me. You may leave now. Thales finished his speech. Poutre raised his eyebrows whereas Nicholas was slightly stunned. Viscount Kenvida furrowed his brows as he watched the situation from afar, then he let out a deep sigh. However, in the end, Kenvida only nodded at the frowning Tolja and walked forwards with huge strides. The things this child says. Your mission to escort me to Dragon Cloud City is already almost completed. By that, he's saying, Black Sand region is responsible for my safety before I reach Dragon Cloud City, but we have yet to reach Dragon Cloud City, you know. I believe the people will praise the Archduke of Black Sand's loyalty to King Nuvan. Which would mean he's saying, everyone will know that King Nuvan abducted the Prince of Constellation while acting as if the army of Black Sand region was not by their side when it happened. And King Nuvan will also be satisfied with your indomitable fealty. That is equivalent to him saying, no matter how submissive you are, King Nuvan's relationship with the Archduke of Black Sand will still not improve. Dragon Cloud City will still regard Black Sand region as a thorn in their side. Meanwhile, I am very grateful for your efforts in escorting me. That is the same as him saying, before you is a chance to win over the friendship of the Prince of Constellation. You may leave now. That is him saying, hurry up and get me out of this mess. Lord Nicholas, Viscount Kenvida spoke up while he pondered again whether Poutre taught the second prince how to speak. This is, after all, the campsite of the army of Black Sand region. The Archduke entrusted us with a mission to ensure Prince Thales' safety, and your current behavior is unquestionably very insensible. Nicholas shook off Ida's hand. He still ignored the swords at his neck, and coldly said to Kenvida, I thought all of you are also extinctions. Of course we are extinctions. Furthermore, we are Northlanders, and Northlanders value our reputation like how a snow eagle cherishes its wings. Kenvida walked towards Nicholas and stared at both parties who were still about ready to jump at each other's throats. His gaze paused on Thales and Poutre for a brief moment. Your Grace, I believe it is highly likely that King Nuvan did not give you a command to tie up the prince until you reach Dragon Cloud City. Behind him, the soldiers of Black Sand region slowly closed in towards their direction under Tolja's signal. Nicholas stared intently at Kenvida. Then, his lips curled up into a faint, cold sneer. The man's complexion became even paler. If I say no, then what are you going to do, Viscount of Black Sand region? Are you going to let your army annihilate the king's team of personal guards? Right, warriors of Black Sand region, Nicholas chuckled as he swept his gaze over his surroundings and at the elite regular soldiers who were specially chosen by the Archduke of Black Sand. Thales' heart sank. This is bad. It seems like even the army of Black Sand region is still unable to deter Nicholas and his White Blade guards. You are currently in our campsite, and you have less than 100 men with you. Tolja walked over from behind Kenvida and stared solemnly at the white weapon on Nicholas's back. Even with the severing soul's blade, you can only last for a few more minutes longer than your other men. You are not a Rockamerk and you do not have his motionless bow. Thales could clearly see that Nicholas's brows moved slightly in the exact instant he heard of that name. On the other hand, Kenvida was staring intently at Nicholas's face. Of course, we absolutely do not want to become enemies with the famous White Blade guards, especially since we had once fought together 12 years ago. Also, regardless of whether it is you or I, both of us are unable to shoulder the responsibility of causing conflict between Dragon Cloud City and Black Sand region. Thales had a realization. White Blade guards. He recalled what Poutre had told him about Caslin's identity. Caslin retired from the military 12 years ago, so. Thales spoke slowly and caught the attention of everyone at the scene. Lord Nicholas, you know, we had just passed by Caslin's Hero Tavern a few days ago. Thales noticed that Nicholas's expression changed suddenly after he had finished speaking. The gazes of the surrounding White Blade Guards warriors who confronted them started to twinkle. Caslin, it seems that old man means something to them. Thales nodded secretly to himself. Thales continued to speak calmly. Caslin offered me a pint of rye wine, the type where only a limited supply is available. He is a wise and open-minded old man, but I think you might not know him. Am I right, Lord Nicholas? Nicholas's eyes revealed his complicated emotions. As if you would not know him. Thales sighed. He left a deep impression on me. I believe the White Blade Guards led by someone like him would be completely different from yours. Nicholas stared at him in silence. Then, Thales clenched his teeth tightly like he had just made up his mind. Under everyone's shocked gazes, the second prince immediately yelled, constellations, put down your weapons. Wya and Ralph stared at Thales in surprise. Even Ida gasped in surprise from under her cloak. The constellations looked at the surrounding white blade guards glaring at them with hostility, then they exchanged doubtful glances with each other. They could not believe the order given by the prince. Only Putre was in deep thought. Kenpida and Tolja furrowed their brows at the same time, whereas Nicholas stared at Thales with an indiscernible expression. This is an order from your second prince, from the heir to Constellation's throne. Thales had a firm expression on his face as he repeated his order. Putre was the first one to sheath his sword and took a step back. Immediately afterwards, Gennard also put his sword away without any hesitation. Wya glanced at the prince in disbelief. Under the latter's unquestionable gaze, he kept his teeth clenched and retracted his sword from Nicholas's neck. Ralph followed suit, then the fifth soldier, the sixth. It continued until all the constellations put their weapons away. Under everyone's watchful gazes, Thales took a step forward and walked past Wya and Ralph's protection until he was in front of Nicholas. Nicholas lowered his head and stared at Thales with his face devoid of any emotions. You should have done this sooner. If you had submitted to me earlier, you would have experienced less suffering. Enough, your grace, Thales interrupted him coldly, then continued speaking while forcing down the tremor in his voice. I do not know why you insist on tying me up to go back to Dragon Cloud City. I do not care whether it is for the new enmity or the old hatred, whether it is for Prince Moriah or for Prince Horus, but before I finish my first mission, I will only answer to King Nuvan. Even if King Nuvan decides to kill me to avenge his own kin, he still needs to let me die in an honorable manner that befits my status. Nicholas stared at the second prince of Constellation in surprise. Thales took in a deep breath. This is the conversation between the future king of Constellation and the current king of Extit, but you want to humiliate me in advance when I am about to meet and converse with King Nuvan. Without a doubt, you are not only humiliating me, you are also humiliating King Nuvan and bringing shame upon his honor. But I do not care. Thales had a solemn expression on his face when he turned to face the surrounding White Blade Guards. Continue, White Blade Guards, the Dragon's Imperial Guards. Kidnap a 7-year-old child to Dragon Cloud City. I do not care at all if you want to tie me up, humiliate me, mock me, ridicule me, or how you are going to bring shame upon someone's honor. I do not care about those things at all. The thing I care about is only my mission, the truth of Prince Moriah's death, the justice he should obtain, and the war and peace between the two countries. I was already prepared for this since I came to this place. Even if Nuvan is a butcher with his hands covered in blood, an incompetent king who listens to slander, a despicable and shameless, vile character, or a coward who cares a lot about his reputation, I am already prepared for it all. Nicholas's expression became incomparably complicated. The White Blade Guards still did not move their unmasked eyes. In his tavern, Caslin was like a true elder. He treated me to his best wine, laughed when he patted my shoulder, and asked me to grow up faster. At the same time, he told me that King Nuvan is a good king. He is forthright and generous, lenient and fair. He can shield a nameless soldier by personally putting himself in front of an orc's axe. Every Northland warrior believed that dying for the king was the highest glory. Eventually, a few White Blade Guards moved slightly. Thales turned around and spread his hands. He raised his head and stared at Nicholas calmly. I believe in Caslin's reputation, so I also believe in King Nuvan's reputation. In the past few days, we have eaten the Northlanders' food and drank their wine. According to the customs of Northland, we are now King Nuvan's guest and sojourning on the national land under his reign. Thales said slowly as he stared unwaveringly at Nicholas's pale face. As for how King Nuvan decides to treat his guest, we do not have a say in the matter. Go on, treat me as your prey and tie me up to Dragon Cloud City as a gift to King Nuvan. Show the world what kind of king he is. The White Blade Guards exchanged glances with each other rapidly, then turned to look at their commander together. Kenpida's gaze flickered continuously between Thales and Putre while he seemed like he was in deep thought. On the other hand, Wya stared worriedly at the Star Killer across from him. As for Nicholas, who would make the most crucial decision, he slowly narrowed his eyes. After a few seconds, he looked at Thales and smiled faintly. Thales Jadastar, you truly are as cunning as the rumors claimed. Truly, you do not seem like a 7-year-old child. Thales was momentarily stunned. Nicholas stared at Thales with a complicated look in his face. Put away your weapons, my brothers. Let the king decide what should be done with our guest. Even if the enmity between him and us is as deep as the ocean. After receiving the order, the White Blade Guards shifted their gazes and uniformly sheathed their swords. Thales finally let out a sigh in relief. The Constellations also breathed relieved sighs. The two Black Sand region commanders did the same thing. Right at this moment. Alert! At the perimeter of the campsite, the soldiers of Black Sand region were heard yelling to bring about vigilance in others. Everyone's attention was instantly brought towards the exterior of the campsite. Under the moonlight, new cavaliers appeared in front of them and made their ways towards the campsite. Kenpida narrowed his eyes and he asked Nicholas, are they your comrades? Nicholas did not reply him. The sound of horse hooves galloping from beyond the campsite were heard. There were a dozen something of cavaliers. They raised a strange flag as they moved slowly towards the campsite. It was a flag with a white base. A curved golden wheat was drawn on the flag. The golden wheat extended from the upper right corner of the flag to its bottom left corner, and intersected with a golden dagger. A stranger's voice came from a distance away. "Good evening, everyone. Praise the Lady of Harvests and the Maiden Ocean Guardian. Let us hope that they may bless and protect everyone to have a comfortable and plentiful life." Kenvida took a few steps forward. He furrowed his brows as he stared at the wheat and dagger flag. "I am Lhasa Kenvida, Viscount of the City of Halting Light, and this is the military camp of the Archduke of Black Sand." Viscount Kenvida yelled, "Who are you?" Under the protection of dozens of cavaliers, a middle-aged man wearing in a gorgeous cloak slowly rode out from the crowd. He wore a winter bowler hat encrusted with jewels. Under that hat was a blonde ponytail. "I am Shiles Bamra, the honorary Marquis of Good Flow City." The middle-aged man stopped his horse. He took off his hat and placed it on his left chest with a friendly and humble smile on his face. He bowed slightly in Kenvida's direction. "I came from the friendly and generous 16 city-states of Camus Union, and I am one of the 36 members of the Camus Union's joint parliament. I represent Good Flow City of the Union, and am on a diplomatic trip to Extit. When I heard that the second prince of Constellation is here, I came here specifically to greet you." Ellipsis. Early morning, Dragon Cloud City, the road west. There was a Far Easterner with black hair and black eyes. He was about 30 to 40 years old. It was hard to tell a Far Easterner's age from their appearances because their rate of aging was different from Rudalians and Northlanders. He carried an everlasting lamp and walked steadily in the gloomy, cold underground cellar, planning to start a day's work. But then he furrowed his brows, because he seemed to have felt something. He stopped in his tracks and carefully swept his eyes over every corner in front of him in the quiet darkness. His ears were listening to every sound of activity in the underground cellar. There was nothing at all, but he did not let down his guard. Because he trusted his intuition more. Most of the time, danger cannot be found with the eyes and ears. Instinct was the last thing life can rely on. Just like now. He clenched his teeth tightly, frowned, and put on a ferocious expression in the direction of the darkness beyond the lamplight. Just like a wolf that sharpened its teeth and claws because it sensed danger, he was vigilant about the danger in the darkness. Immediately after, this Far Easterner moved. With one hand lifting the everlasting lamp, he used his other hand to press against his waist as he crouched down. He turned sideways and faced the wall on his left as well as the darkness behind the corner. "Who's there?" the Far Easterner asked calmly. There was no answer. The Far Easterner used a lingua franca heavy with the Northlanders' accent while he moved slowly but rhythmically. "If you want to steal some money, brother, then you have come to the wrong place." There was still no answer. The Far Easterner narrowed his eyes. In the next moment, his figure moved in a flash. He only used 3 steps to close the distance worth a dozen something steps. The Far Easterner moved past the corner and his everlasting lamp illuminated everything there. But the Far Easterner gasped in surprise. There was no one in the corner in front of him. After a few seconds, the Far Easterner sighed in relief. "Am I too paranoid?" The Far Easterner carefully investigated the corner to ensure that there were no traces left by anyone. He shook his head and shrugged, then he patted his head. "It seems like I am. Why can I not seem to drop this old, bad habit of mine? Even now, I am still overly paranoid even while I sleep." A wolf does not sleep soundly because of its vigilance. That was the first lesson his master had taught him a very long time ago, when his master abandoned him on the northern prairies and left him to live independently for 3 days. He sighed. "I really hope that I can get a good night's sleep one day, to forget everything from my past." The Far Easterner laughed in a self-deprecating manner, then he turned around immediately and walked towards the original route from whence he came. The light also turned around with him. And illuminated another person behind him who had suddenly appeared. The Far Easterner's pupils narrowed. He lifted the hand from his waist instinctively. Thud, asterisk. The Far Easterner was shocked to discover that his dagger-wielding right hand was firmly seized by the unexpected guest. He was unable to move. "Long time no see, Gu," the other party said slowly. The Far Easterner forced down the shock within him and tried to control his body from trembling. He also tried his best to resist his instinct to activate the power of eradication so he could free himself. He stared intently at the man who suddenly appeared. It was an ordinary-looking man. "Yes, long time no see," the Far Easterner Gu replied bitterly. "Black Sword." Black Sword released Gu's wrist. "Lance asked me to come to you," the man called Black Sword said in a cold and brief manner. "He's still the same as before." Gu put his dagger back on his waist and frowned. Concise and direct, chills a person's heart just by speaking. Gu sucked in a deep breath and erased every single unnecessary emotion and memory before he said seriously, "Yes. I found that person." The Black Sword did not utter a single word. "Are you sure?" The Black Sword only asked slowly after a few seconds. Gu deeply exhaled. Even though I have not met him in person, it should be him. It is unlikely that I would be wrong. The black sword stayed silent. This is strange, Gu secretly thought to himself, why is he so calm? Should he not be? The black sword turned around and said faintly, I will come find you again at night to ask about the details. I still have something to do. I need to find a doctor. Come find me again. Gu recalled how this person came and went like a phantom. He could not help but to furrow his brows. When Gu finished recalling his past memories, he could only feel agitated and rattled. He said helplessly, all right, I have a business deal to do as well, anyway. Business. The black sword furrowed his brows and recalled Gu's notorious past. His figure once again disappeared in the darkness away from the light. What kind of business can you do? What business? Gu exhaled irritably. He walked to the table at the side and lifted the oilcloth on it to reveal a bone knife and a chopping board. He then said exasperatedly, this is my butcher shop. I am selling meat, of course. Chapter 119. A Marquis from Camus. Amid the chilly wind, a troop made up of a complicated and strange combination of people formed a long train and headed towards Dragon Cloud City. Even though they escaped the horrible fate of being tied up and brought to Dragon Cloud City, the next day, without listening to their protests, the White Blade Guards, under Nicholas's command, invited them, the Constellation Diplomat Group, out of Black Sand Region's escort range. They were to head to Dragon Cloud City under the tight escort of the White Blade Guards instead. Black Sand Region's army slowly followed them on both flanks and from the rear in perfect order. Kentvida and Tolja still conscientiously fulfilled their duties and dispatched scouts to ensure the safety of the roads around them. As for the White Blade Guards, these masked, elite soldiers were cold, detached and said very little. They were also rough and unreasonable. They almost started a fight a few times with Constellation soldiers just because they were pushed and shoved. For the Jadastar family's royal bloodline to continue, and for there to be an heir to Constellation, this means a lot to the entire Western Peninsula. What I mean is that, the change in the ruling royal family might bring years of chaos, which will be hard for Constellation to subside. This is something all of Western Peninsula, including ourselves, the Camians, do not want to see. The middle-aged Marquis with his blonde hair in a braided ponytail talked to the second prince of Constellation with an amiable smile while he sat elegantly on his horse. Thank you very much for your concern, Marquis Shiles of Good Flow City. Thales nodded at the guest from Camus Union with an equally stiff smile while he sat stiffly on his horse. This uninvited guest just seemed a little too easygoing. Thales felt that the smile on Shiles' face was like those of the polite and neatly dressed people who stood in front of the western city gate of Eternal Star City, eagerly acting as local guides for guests on their first visit to Eternal Star City. There were a number of such youngsters or tomboys in the Black Street Brotherhood. Often, they cooperated pretty well with the child beggars and thugs. Whenever they found a suitable target, they would get to work swiftly and decisively. As for the guests, their best outcome would be to have all their money cheated off them. If it was a little worse, they would have their wallet stolen. Worse still, they might even get robbed in some dark alley. Of course, the worst outcome, you would not want to know. A languid voice said from beside Thales, be careful, brat. When Camians get close to you without reason, there is definitely something they want. It's either money or, achoo. As Ida talked under her cloak, she held on to Thales' horse and let out a loud sneeze, rubbing her nose pitifully. Ida, are you okay? Thales asked worriedly, you have been sick since we entered Northland. Don't worry, this temperature is nothing. The elf waved her hand furiously, 45 degrees to her left, not caring at all how boorish the movement looked. Years ago, I hoisted my greatsword on my back and traversed the wild vast mountain, battled on the grand banquet hill with a human head in my hands. Achoo. Hiya, Thales sighed, I had better make you an extra bonfire tonight. Unconcerned, Marquis Shiles laughed. This lady who hides her beauty under her cloak must have misunderstood something. Although Camus Union is renowned for commerce and trade, we are not like those short-sighted people who deliberately flatter and curry other people's favor for the sake of immediate interests. We strive for long-term gains and mutual benefits. Only trades like this can flourish and last. So, if you say that I want something from you, what I want would definitely be your friendship, your highness. Ida snorted, all Camians are liars and good-for-nothings, especially those from Good Flow City. Ralph, who was on the other side of Thales' horse, scratched his head awkwardly. On the other hand, Shiles smiled and did not say anything. Wya, who was forcefully holding the reins of Thales' steed to prevent it from running wild. Hiya, I must have been bestowed the ability of being the enemy of horses. The second prince's crazy words shook his head and said, it might be a little too biased to put it that way, there were also a few Camians in the Tower of Eradication. Although most of them were Camus Union citizens from poor origins, when it came to their abilities and personalities, I think they were not that different from our kingdom and Extit's apprentices. Marquis Shiles smiled and said, thank you for standing on the side of justice and saying what is true, Attendant Casso. That is because you have not, achoo, seen the worst among those men. Ida sneezed again and put her hands on her hips in dissatisfaction. They will definitely leave a huge impression on you. On that note, have you met such a Camion, Ida? Thales asked curiously. Yes, Ida said fiercely and with disdain, an abominable liar, a boastful man. A master in fine words and opportunistic, ah choo. The elf rubbed her snot and shivered. Thales shrugged. It seems that she was once deceived by Camions, and she was deceived pretty badly. He refocused his gaze on Marquis Shiles Bamra of Camus Union, from Good Flow City, which was at the western side of the peninsula. Your Excellency, I heard that Camus Union is a kingdom of traders, Thales asked slowly. I wonder if that is true. Of course, many people know it as such, and I cannot say that such a description or representation is completely wrong either. Hearing the prince's enquiry, it was as though Shiles suddenly gained driving force. He spoke joyfully, however, it was all the result of history, Your Highness, history. Thales' interest to research and explore was also piqued. History, I heard that Camus Union is a kingdom that was formed by a few states after the Battle of Eradication, a kingdom that began by relying on commerce. So, this forged your kingdom's tradition and foundation. Seeing Thales' expression, Marquis Shiles smiled and said slowly, to be precise, we are not considered a kingdom. At least, we are not a conventional kingdom. After the Battle of Eradication, 4 cities in the western part of the Western Peninsula formed a union to help one another, and to try their best to protect themselves in that chaotic time. Located at the southwest of Exted and northwest of the Great Desert, Good Flow City was one of them. This is the origin of Camus Union. We lack resources and reserves, and are stuck between a few forces of power. The people of Camus Union can only find a living through commerce and trade, supporting our tradesmen to make a living outside with an open environment and a lenient tax policy. Besides, we serve as the transporters of merchant goods and resources for various main forces of power. Looking at it from this perspective, we are indeed a kingdom of tradesmen. Marquis Shiles directed the topic of discussion to something deeper. Although these cities belong to Camus Union, they operate independently and have their own governance. Apart from the Union public law, all the cities have their own statutes and decrees, their own ruling family, their own manners and customs, and of course their own unique features. For example, I am representing Good Flow City within the Union on a diplomatic mission to Exted. For this purpose, we are not like a kingdom, but a mutual organization formed by a group of tradesmen. Thales could not hold back his interest and asked, but all of you are known as a union, right? There should be something that shows that it is a union, like a highest authority that all the cities follow. Of course, Shiles laughed mischievously, the so-called highest unified parliament of Camus, responsible for allocating the resources within the union and harmonizing the relationship between the states. At least, it is nominally that way. A lot of people also believe that, but reality is often stranger than fiction, much stranger. As if mocking himself, Shiles shook his head and sneered. Still, I heard that Camus' influence is not to be underestimated. Thales navigated through the knowledge reserves in his mind. Most of them were things that Gilbert taught him within a short month. Camus is rich and has plenty of resources, the wallet of the Western Peninsula. There are people who place you together with Constellation and Exted, calling us the Western Peninsula's strongest 3. Wallet, Shiles laughed bitterly and said, do you really think that is a good nickname? Thales shrugged, all right, that is indeed not a good nickname. Just like how no one would ever feel happy for being called a fat sheep. The mere act of interceding and protecting ourselves within various kingdoms through these past few hundred years has exhausted a lot of our energy. And an influence that is not to be underestimated. It is more of an extensive business route. Marquis Shiles shook his head. Like I said before, having helped and defended each other's countries up to this point, the Union's business grew, and our trading routes increased in number as well. And so, the 4 little cities became 4 states, and new cities began joining our Union. Now, Camus Union has 16 independently operating business states, and our business routes span through the entire Western Peninsula. The entire Western Peninsula? How did all of you achieve this? Thales asked curiously, can you describe it to me in detail? It is not as exaggerated as what you imagine. These are routes that the 16 states individually carved out. Marquis Shiles smiled as he drew a gentleman's cane from his saddle and drew route after route in the air. Starting from the north, we have a direct route for our land merchants going through Exted City of Faraway Prayers and Prestige Orchid region, moving south to Thornlands Olumbia Kingdom and Dragon-Kissed Lands Anlenzo Dukedom, East White Mountain, Alliance of Freedom, and even the west of the Great Desert. This route alone allows us to pay a visit to most of the Western Peninsula. In fact, the entire left half of the peninsula is within our reach. With a look of exultation, the Marquis continued to talk. On the other hand, our western harbor which is near Demon Sea allowed Camus Union's business to penetrate into further regions. There are the 3 Demon Islands, the various kingdoms of the west coast such as Olumbia Kingdom and the Tarundi Collegium in the west. As for the north, after crossing the Sea of Despair and reaching the Sea of Long Corridors, there would be the Northern Dukedom, the Anlenzo Dukedom, the Archipelago of Long Corridors, the Sarah Dukedom and various kingdoms on the east coast. There are also trading fleets that have greater trading aspirations that make them want to expand their businesses beyond this place, so they continued east, out of the Sea of Long Corridors, and across the Mystery Sea and the Mist Sea. They will arrive at the rich and populous Evergreen Island, which stands alone outside the southwestern sea and is ruled by one of Constellation's 13 distinguished families, the Sucator family. They might even continue east, past Crystal Jade City, which was built on Crystal Jade Island by the Western Sea merfolk, and following Constellation's sea business route to the Sea of Termination and even the Western Peninsula. This way, the entire right half of the peninsula is also brought into the Union's business route. That sounds amazing. Thales furrowed his brows and said seriously, Camus Union's influence extends all over the peninsula. This is not an exaggeration at all. Exactly the opposite. Marquis Shiles shook his head and said, Camus Union only has city defense teams that belong to all the states and does not have a unified army force. It is all the more so impossible for us to wage war. Even trifle disputes within the unified parliament can last for 3 years. As we rely on trade and commerce to survive, even if we are nobles we need to go outside and explore new horizons, then trade with new people. When I was 13, I followed my father to Olumbia Kingdom for the first time. Our family's caravan was detained there. Beside the horse, Ralph walked on the snow-covered ground and clenched his fist slightly. So, you can understand now that I am sincerely happy for there to be a new prince of Constellation. This means that a powerful kingdom in the Western Peninsula like Constellation would remain stable. The Marquis shook his head. Even in Exted, where the king selection system has become the norm, whenever the royal power shifts to a new Archduke family, like from Dragon Cloud City's Walton family to Beacon Illumination City's Pofret family, or Prestige Orchid Region's Olsius family, there would be considerable turmoil for us. The trade routes and long-term business agreements we have established have to be reconsidered or even completely erased according to the ruling order and customs of different families, compared to a traditional kingdom like Constellation, which is laden with rules and has a long-ruling hereditary royal family like Jadastar. So from this, our business is often disrupted by the frequently changing circumstances within these countries. Shiles sighed deeply. If there was a competition for places where nobles live a harder life compared to members of the populace, please cast Camus Union a vote. HMPH, serves all of you right, Ida snorted coldly, wanting to make a profit and living comfortably at the same time. There is no way that something this good would exist. What you said is indeed the truth, madam. Marquis Shiles sighed and placed the gentleman's cane back in his saddle. As you can see, at the age of 38, I still have to go out and work hard to survive. So, you sought me for a reason. Thales chuckled dryly. Is this considered an effort to carve out a future business network in Constellation? It is for the sake of friendship. Shiles blinked in amusement. Of course, if you have anything, and I do mean anything, you need, and it is beyond the territory of your kingdom, please be sure to let me know. Marquis Shiles laughed. As a marquis of a small city, I am not good in other things apart from owning a few networks and social connections with various kingdoms. Wait, Marquis. Thales furrowed his brows. There are dukes, counts, viscounts, barons and lords, but I have never heard of a title called marquis in the world. Hearing this, Shiles looked at Thales with a resigned gaze. Editor's note. 1. Camions, citizens of Camus. The same case as extinctions and constellations. Chapter 120 Bait. A distance away, Poutre bid farewell to Viscount Kentvita. The latter continued leading Black Sand Region's troops forward, and the former returned to the prince's side. Ah, Marquis. Huh, Marquis Shiles nodded at Poutre, who just returned. He exhaled. Marquis, hee. Actually, my status within Camus Union is only about the same as the counts who rule a city. Even Good Flow City is not in my sole jurisdiction. Marquis Shiles smiled slightly. However, as a tradesman, I often have to visit dukes and kings to forge good relations, so my status cannot be too shabby. After all, not every kingdom is like Constellation and Extit, who have the clout to dispatch barons or even lords as envoys to each other's kingdoms. Oh, Thales scratched his head and said while feeling incredibly awkward, so, it is actually not a common practice in the world to dispatch barons, lords, and envoys, and it is only done between Extit and Constellation. Riding in front of the prince, Poutre turned his head back and shook it slightly. The relationship between Constellation and the dragon is a special case. Apart from Maynard Knox and Handball, you probably won't be able to find another pair of kingdoms who despise and hate each other to this extent. Thus, for a little suzerain like me whose territory is adjacent to various powerful kingdoms, I have no choice but to visit them frequently. Marquis Shiles blinked and flashed a humble and bemused smile. A resolution was passed by Camus Union's joint parliament to officiate as an alleged, honorary marquis. It appears to be a rank higher than counts, but does not exceed that of archdukes and dukes. This lets those visited by us to feel as if they are taken seriously while not pressuring them with the status. In truth, there is not much difference between us and the usual counts. Poutre nodded. In contrast, Constellation and Extit inherited the Empire's system of classifying nobles. The highest would be the aristocratic dukes or archdukes that are of honorable origins, and guard all the borders. After that are the counts who are the suzerains of feudal territories, and the viscounts who are slightly below them. Then, the local barons whose titles have been passed down from generation to generation. Lastly, the lords who only have assets but no right to inherit titles. Shiles chuckled bitterly. Only Camus Union has the strange title of Marquis. It is just because of the trend of the times. Please take no notice of it. Thales nodded. He turned his head and inadvertently saw a figure in a white cape to his left, diagonally ahead of him. It was the Star Killer, Nicholas, who represented King Nuvan. As though having felt Thales' gaze, he turned his head around abruptly. His sharp gaze shot towards Thales like the blade of a sword, as though warning him. Thales could not help but frown. Lord Nicholas, it's not very easy to get along with him, is it? Beside Thales, Shiles noticed his gaze and flashed an understanding smile. Northlanders are simple and straightforward, but they are also awful beings when they are stubborn. Thales turned to the noble from another kingdom, a stranger to him. Poutre faintly replied, Marquis Shiles, it appears that you are rich with experiences. I recall that Good Flow City is the neighbor of the city of Faraway Prayers west of Extit. Do you often keep in touch with Archduke Ronnie's family? Trust me, I understand the difficulties of being neighbors with Northlanders, Shiles sighed, I have dealt with them many times. Sometimes, you would fall in love with their frankness and integrity, but sometimes you would also hate to death their rigidness and inflexibility. A cold voice interrupted them, to discuss about people behind their backs is not a good way to do business, Your Grace. Thales was stunned. Nicholas had at some point ridden his horse to Thales' left side. What is the matter, Lord Nicholas? Poutre asked with a serious expression without sounding rude. Seeing that the Star Killer from the White Blade Guards had approached, Wya vigilantly held the handle of his sword as he walked on Thales' left side. Step back, Star Killer. Wya pulled out half of his sword's blade with an unpleasant expression. I have noted your inquiries, but His Highness does not need you to escort him. Nicholas was totally unconcerned and snorted coldly. On the other hand, Ralph increased his pace and caught up with Thales' steed. He had an anxious expression. Following Thales on his right, Ida crossed her arms and intentionally, or unintentionally, drew closer to Nicholas. Brat, if you want to fight, I am up for it any time. Thales had no choice but to raise his hand, signaling for the Constellations to hold their horses and not worry. Both of you know each other. Thales furrowed his brows, the commander of the White Blade Guards and the Marquis of a city in Camus Union. Nicholas's gaze was deep and he made no comment. On the other hand, Shiles smiled slightly and said, We have met a few times. Thales shook his head, but then he immediately raised it and looked at Nicholas. He then looked at the smiling Marquis Shiles. He could not help but become stunned. Marquis Shiles, Thales asked with slight curiosity, yesterday night when you first came, you mentioned that you were also in Extit for a diplomatic trip. Yes, the Crystal Drop Ore contract between Good Flow City and Dragon Cloud City is almost expiring. At the same time, I am here to start up other businesses. Marquis Shiles blinked profoundly. In truth, I and my diplomat group had stayed at the periphery of Dragon Cloud City for a month and discussed a few large trades with a few suzerains. Hearing that the Prince of Constellation is at Prestige Orchid region, I came to visit. Dragon Cloud City. Thales had an idea. You traveled purposely to Prestige Orchid region from Dragon Cloud City just to visit me. Thales mentally drew the map of Extit that Poutre had recounted to him these past few days in his mind. Not knowing whether to believe Shiles or not, he said, You really set your mind to it, did you not? From what I know, the journey is not easy. That's why I said that Camians would definitely want something from you, Ida said with disdain, who would travel such a long distance for no reason other than to visit an unlucky child. Thales scratched his head awkwardly. Poutre regained his attention and carefully contemplated the relationship. Haha, there is a quote that is circulated among the elves, love is worth hacking one's way through the jungle and bushes for, and friendship is worth crossing over mountains and ravines for. Shiles blinked, and I came for the sake of friendship. Of course, it is also for the sake of future connections. Disgusting. This was Ida's reaction. Wait, the suspicion in Thales' heart grew. If you came from Dragon Cloud City. He raised his head and looked at Nicholas in front of him. The Star Killer stared at him without any expression. The White Blade Guards are the personal guards of the common elected king, all of you also came from Dragon Cloud City. Thales furrowed his brows tightly and looked at Marquis Shiles. Your Grace arrived at almost the same time as the White Blade Guards, but did not encounter each other earlier. Nicholas and Shiles glanced at each other. The latter smiled and said, We probably did not notice each other because of the wind and snow. No, Thales narrowed his eyes. They are the most outstanding elites in all of Extit. It is impossible for them to not notice all of you. Of course it's impossible. Poutre continued the prince's words and nodded in realization. We are talking about the White Blade Guards, the renowned military force of Northland. Even throughout Extit, only the glacial sentries are on par with them. Even though both parties have been destroyed and rebuilt many times, it would have been too easy for them to notice a cavalier unit that is such a short distance away. Nicholas snorted softly. On the other hand, Shiles laughed. Thales said, enunciating each word, and both of you appeared at almost the same time, one after another, it's a little too suspicious. Shiles raised his brows, shook his head and could not help laughing. Thales watched him in astonishment, and met Poutre's eyes. Enough, Your Grace, Nicholas said plainly, it's time to complete what His Majesty entrusted us to do. His Majesty entrusted us to do. Thales glanced at Nicholas, and then at Shiles. The suspicion in his heart became increasingly clear. Both of you are working together. Thales figured it out. He looked for Black Sand Region's troops who were a distance away. They advanced in uniformity. Tolja was still leading the scouts to investigate the road ahead. Kenpedo was discussing their next step with one of his subordinates. The Black Sand Region soldiers, on the other hand, were dutifully standing guard around them. Thales inhaled slowly. Putre, who had understood something, said plainly, "Your Highness, it appears that we have landed ourselves in another terrible situation." Haya, Thales sighed and raised his head, watching the Extichans and Camions in front of him with a burning gaze. "These are all King Nuven's wishes, is it? Since we have already come to this," Shiles smiled as he spoke, "why not take a guess, Your Highness?" Thales fixed his stare on him. A few seconds later, Thales said calmly, "Lord Nicholas, you did not come upon Black Sand Archduke's army by chance, nor did you start a conflict with us by chance." His gaze fell on Nicholas. The latter continued staring ahead and did not seem intent on paying Thales any attention. However, a second later, in contrast to his previous coolness, the Star Killer spoke slowly. "Of course not." Nicholas's voice was cold. "One of the things I hate the most in life is to step into Lampard's army camp. Besides..." The Star Killer turned his head. His gaze was piercing. "Why would I have the leisure to kidnap a little brat whose teeth are not even fully grown yet?" Thales paid no heed to Nicholas's disrespect. His heartbeat increased and his mind began working rapidly. "If it was not by chance, then, yesterday night. It seems that you don't often do things like this, Your Grace." Thales smiled bitterly. "No wonder I felt that something was amiss yesterday. As expected, your acting skills are too stiff." Putre slowly took out his tobacco pipe. His brows were furrowed tightly. Nicholas and Shiles glanced at each other. "I heard that you are a prince who is good with words and thinks well." Marquis Shiles blinked meaningfully, a genius who could electrify his listeners with his words in the national conference at the age of 7, Prince Thales. Thales was slightly stunned. "Is that what people say about me? This is not good. My words and actions at the national conference have become so widely known." "You are more famous than you think you are, brat." Nicholas's figure on his horse was steady, but he gave the others an unsettling feeling. He said faintly, "Constellation found their only prince and heir, and announced your existence to the entire kingdom." Marquis Shiles nodded and smiled. "So, Marquis Shiles of Camus Union." Thales furrowed his brows tightly and turned towards the middle-aged Marquis who had his blonde hair up in a braided ponytail. "Your intention was also not as simple as visiting me. You went to Lampard's military camp at that time with only one goal." Smiling, Shiles immediately bowed slightly. "To prevent the White Blade Guards from starting a conflict with us, as an envoy from a third country." Thales cast Shiles a firm gaze. Thales turned to Nicholas. "As for you, Lord Nicholas, as the Jadestar royal family's enemy, you were especially dispatched here to provoke us, were you not?" "We were supposed to get into a fight," Nicholas said coldly. "The White Blade Guards would have beaten up all your people until they laid face down on the ground. Before things got out of hand, I would have appeared. Because of the reputation of Camus Union's envoy, the White Blade Guards would have retreated." Marquis Shiles flashed a mysterious smile and continued Nicholas's words. "However, the horrible relationship between Prince Thales and King Nuven would have been noticed by everyone in camp." Wya and Ralph looked at Thales in surprise and bewilderment. They then looked at Nicholas. "Continue maintaining hostility, Wya and Ralph." Putre understood something. He tapped his tobacco pipe lightly without changing his expression. "We must let the people from Black Sand Region see that our relationship with Lord Nicholas is bad, very bad." Wya's eyes widened. "Lord Nicholas, you originally planned to let the others see King Nuven's attitude towards me through provocation and conflict." Thales lowered his head and said quietly, "It turns out that due to my unreasonable demands, it was inconvenient for you to take action, wasn't it?" Nicholas did not give any answer. "To be honest, when I arrived as planned and saw that it was so peaceful between all of you." Shiles nodded. "I also felt that it was strange. I even wondered if my watch was fast and I arrived a little too early." "What happened?" Thales asked calmly. "Why do we have to put on such an act in Lampard's camp?" "Who is it for? Lampard?" "Not just for him," Shiles said plainly, "it was more for the informants within his army." "Go on," Thales said seriously. "The news of you coming to Dragon Cloud City has reached almost all suzerains and nobles of Exted with the messenger crows." Nicholas continued coldly, "The visitation of the Prince of Constellation is the most major end-of-year event in our kingdom. Therefore, His Majesty has already sent invitations to the 9 archdukes outside of Dragon Cloud City. At least 5 of them have already responded to the invitation. They have either reached, or will be reaching Dragon Cloud City, and are awaiting your arrival." "Do you mean that, because of my visit?" Thales slowly arranged his thoughts, which were a mess. King Nuven deliberately invited these archdukes to Dragon Cloud City. Why, and how is this related to the informants in Lampard's army? Tightening his white cape, Nicholas said plainly, "The Archduke of Black Sand was not the only one who plotted the murder of Prince Mariah. With the advantage of being Constellation's neighbor, Chapman Lampard formed a pact with Arund outside the kingdom. But within the kingdom, There are other powers who conspired with Lampard, and even led the planning of His Highness' murder. King Nuvan, who lost his last heir. Thales furrowed his brows tightly. His enemies, who are also Lampard's accomplices, are among the archdukes who are heading to Dragon Cloud City. Those ambitious schemers can lay aside all anxiety and rest in contentment. However, with King Nuvan's personality, he would definitely not stand idly by while his foes are carefree and at leisure after committing such a crime. Shiles nodded slightly and sighed. Walton's desire for vengeance is stronger and purer than I had imagined. There must be someone to receive it. He wants vengeance, Poutre said slowly, vengeance on the real culprits. I thought that would be me, Thales said self-deprecatingly, delirious with anger. A father kills the culprit's son to avenge his own son's death. Is that not very normal? This is what the enemies hope for, and also the image we want them to see. Shiles blinked. King Nuvan is a sensible king. He knows who should be held responsible for this matter, and that if war breaks out between Constellation and Exted right now, it would play right into the ambitious schemer's hands. It would be an extremely unwise move. But why is your grace a part of this? Poutre watched Shiles. I thought you were supposed to be a citizen of Camus Union. I did King Nuvan a favor. Marquis Shiles flashed a hearty smile and revealed his pearly white teeth. And in return, he did me a favor regarding the trade and commerce between our kingdoms. Ida snorted coldly. At this moment, Nicholas started laughing grimly. Anyway, this is what His Highness asked me to tell you, Constellation's second prince. For your Highness and King Nuvan's common interest, he is inviting you to partake in his vengeance. It was as though a flame was burning in Nicholas's eyes. The hunter has already sharpened his blades, while the snare and the trap are already in place. The prey is doomed and will not be able to escape. Can I say no? Thales furrowed his brows and looked at Poutre, whose expression was complicated. You know, Nicholas said profoundly, the fires of vengeance has to go somewhere. Thales hung his head low. I think I understand what both of you meant. A few seconds later, Thales exhaled sadly. King Nuvan is the hunter and the White Blade Guards are his weapons. The act yesterday was a trap, and the meeting in Dragon Cloud City would be the last trap. Lampard's accomplices are the prey. So what are you, your grace? Thales turned to Shiles with an apathetic expression. The pickaxe to dig the trap. Shiles coughed awkwardly. No wonder King Nuvan wants to invite me, Thales said with an unpleasant expression, contriving this and that. He only lacks one thing, does he not? Thales turned and looked at both Nicholas and Shiles. However, both of them did not say anything. They stared at him, one with a mischievous gaze and another with a piercing, cold glare. Thales sighed. He shut his eyes, turned his face towards the sky, and uttered the last phrase, bait. Ellipsis. Exted, Dragon Cloud City, Western Driveway. A Far Easterner sent away his last guest and slowly shut the door to the house. He turned his head slowly and looked at the uninvited guest who had just arrived in his shop. I did not expect you to arrive so soon. In the butcher's shop that just closed, Gu watched at the young man in white with a grim expression. I travel pretty fast, the young man said apathetically. What do I call you? Gu took off his apron and stared at the young man. Raphael, the young man said briskly, or, following the custom of the Far Easterners, you may also call me Ra. The single-word family name in the Far East does not work this way, Gu said coldly. HMPH, Morat's little bastard. Gu silently reminded himself. But if they're from the kingdom's secret intelligence department, even younger snake cubs are extremely poisonous. Is that so? Forget about it, it's not important anyway. Raphael nonchalantly and slowly sat down on a chair beside him. Let's get down to business. Thud, asterisk. A dull sound rose. Gu angrily slammed his boning knife on the chopping board. He hated this feeling. Raphael nonchalantly waited for Gu's response. I have already lured Black Sword to Dragon Cloud City as you demanded. Gu closed his eyes miserably. With the news you provided. Oh, Raphael's eyes brightened. What about his whereabouts and condition? I don't know. Gu suppressed the annoyance in his heart. But Black Sword dropped by yesterday. He said that he was looking for a doctor, but I don't know how long he will stay in Dragon Cloud City either. Maybe he will leave right after he finds the doctor. He won't, Raphael chuckled. He will stay long enough, until he finds his objective. HMPH, how do you know? Gu tried his best to erase the guilt he felt for selling out his old friend. He clenched his fist tightly and thought of the figure from the past. Black Sword is the most powerful swordsman I have ever met. He is not someone that all of you can manipulate easily. Even scary beings have weaknesses. The young man in white rose elegantly. Gu furrowed his brows tightly. Black Sword. You know it, too. After all, you are the one who passed the news to him. Raphael chuckled. The information we used to lure him out is something incredibly valuable. As long as there is the slightest possibility, Black Sword would not pass up this opportunity. Raphael's gaze sharpened and his irises shone with strange light. The initiator of disasters and tragedies. The source of everything. The sensory mystic.